Chapter 783. The trick to communication. When he heard the illusory pleas, Klein was attending a banquet at Portland Moments Place due to the time difference. The banquet began from 7:30, and it continued all the way to 9:30, and even 10. This was because the appetizers, soup, side dishes, main dishes, staple food, vegetables, fruits, and desserts had numbered a total of 10 to 20 dishes. The footmen would serve the dishes one after the other, removing and changing dishes in unison to prevent the dining table from turning chaotic, and also providing an interval between the dishes in order to allow the guests to chat. Gentlemen would take the initiative to talk to the ladies to their right. In short, it's rather troublesome and exhausting. I even have to take note of which dish matches with which alcohol. However, it's quite tasty. Taking the opportunity when the roasted lamb was being switched out, he said to Ma'am Willis to his right, "My apologies. I'll need to use the washroom." He got up, pressing his right hand to his chest and bending over slightly as a gesture. Then, he left the dining hall and headed for one of the washrooms on the second story. Upon entering, he locked the door and immediately took 4 steps counterclockwise to head above the gray fog. Mr. Hangman's prayer. He wishes for me to help him in gaining the goodwill of an Obninsk, and he's willing to find 15 pages of Roselle's diary, or help me do something of equal value. His progress isn't slow. Klein sat at the fool's seat as he emanated his spirituality and touched the constantly burgeoning and contracting crimson star. After pondering for a few seconds, he said, "Investigate all FASAC captains who participated in the Konotop Sea battle in 1338. As a historian, Klein immediately knew which sea battle it was when he learned that the interrogator had died at the hands of a Phasacian in 1338. In 1338, the relationship between Lone and Fasak was tense with occasional conflicts. However, there was only one battle that resulted in the death of someone that was at the level of a commander. It was a sea battle that happened in East Balam's Konotop, and on a Phasacian fleet, there were definitely not many captains. In the deep dark waters, Alger Wilson saw the endless grayish-white fog and heard Mr. Fool's answer. Investigate all the captains from the Fasak Empire that were involved in the Konotop Sea battle in 1338. Why would Mr. Fool pay attention to such a trivial figure? Is there some immense secret hidden in this matter? Alger's heart stirred. Without any hesitation, he directly agreed. Your wish is my wish. Such a mission was difficult and very complicated for him, but it wasn't dangerous. It was something that the present him could accept. After the response, Alger heard Mr. Fool's deep voice once again. You can return to the target's vicinity. That's it. As expected of Mr. Fool. After he obtained the authority, he is more like a sea god than Calvetua. His might isn't limited to the Rorstad archipelago. Alger was delighted as he thanked the Fool solemnly. Then, bending his back and kicking his legs, he turned to head down, diving into the depths once more. In just minutes, he returned beside the undersea volcano and saw a turbulent flow in the gigantic dark cave as the tentacles were flailing and had yet to calm down. Although Alger trusted Mr. Fool in being sufficiently powerful and terrifying, an awakening ancient god, he instinctively became cautious when he saw that scene. He carefully inched forward. He suspected that the Obninsk's flailing of its countless tentacles was a sign of welcoming him. And at this moment, above the gray fog, the sea god scepter-wielding Klein frowned slightly. It refuses to communicate with sea god, and it even hates the feeling, making it unwilling to show its goodwill. He muttered under his breath, exasperated. His influence on the surrounding waters, through the prey had failed. For some unknown reason, the Obninsk strongly resisted beyonder powers that promoted an affinity with sea creatures. Through the prayer scene, he could see the thick tentacles thrashing about, and he vaguely sensed that the target was infuriated. It was trying to rip apart all living beings that dared approach it. Mr. Hangman has gone over. He's going over. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he decided to switch his approach. He raised the sea god's scepter a little higher, allowing the blue gems at the tip light up one after another, emitting a bright blinding light. Right on the heels of that, he directed the violent aura of lightning storm over, casting it on the Obninsk. The thick tentacles that thrashed about at the bottom of the sea suddenly froze before falling down. They clung close to the seabed, as countless green points of lights appeared in the dark cave. Amidst a jarring rumbling sound, a terrifying monster that could devour a sailboat crawled out. Its patterned black body was massive and distorted. It had a total of 3 heads, and each head had more than a dozen eyes. All of them were emitting a green light. The monster then prostrated, appearing as obedient as a trained hound. Indeed, tricks are needed in communication. Klein nodded in satisfaction, and once again used the Beyonder affinity powers to make the Obninsk open the mouths of its 3 heads via a psychic connection. This made Alger instantly see 3 dark caves, each of them large enough to provide a sailboat passage inside. Praise be to Mr. Fool! Alger looked at the magnificent scene before him, as he couldn't help but mutter inwardly. He didn't waste any time, and he chose the middle head by quickly swimming towards it. A spiraled and warped passage quickly appeared in Alger's vision, as the walls were made of flesh. The width was comparable to the bow of the Blue Avenger. Whoosh! Water flowed into the passage, heading right for the deep depths. Alger took the opportunity to let his body go with the flow. Suddenly, he felt as though he was back as a sailor, engaging in combat amidst waves, groggy from being tossed around. It couldn't be sustained. By the time Alger used his Beyonder powers and got a hold of himself, he had already left the tunnel of flesh. He was in a dark, spacious world, with a sticky sensation by his feet. There was a putrid stench everywhere around him. In just a second, Alger realized that the liquid inside was corroding him. He hurriedly produced a water membrane, as he made it swell into a transparent sphere. He knew that he was already inside the Obninsk stomach. Without any hesitation, he took out all the bottles he had long prepared, and began concocting the potion. As the supplementary ingredients were thrown into the wide-mouthed metal bottle, they mixed into a dark blue liquid. Following that, Alger carefully threw in a jellyfish that enveloped azure-blue seawater in its translucent membrane. The distant and ethereal singing grew in intensity before calming down. In the bottle, there wasn't any ripples or bubbles. The liquid was dark, just like the ocean before a storm. Alger calmed his mind, entered cogitation, and picked up the metal bottle before cleanly downing the ocean songster potion inside. The liquid was cold as it brought about a numbness that slid down his gullet and into his stomach. It then spread throughout his body cells at an unimaginable speed. At that instant, Alger vaguely heard countless voices. They came from all life at sea, but the Obninsk's body blocked most of it, leaving a relatively screened-out version. Plop! 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 Alger felt his heart beating violently as it spewed blood outwards. His spirituality and the sound waves began to remold his voice and soul. He couldn't help it as he opened his mouth, letting out a loud sigh. Amidst the sigh, Alger felt his spirit body being ripped slightly. As the sound waves spread outwards, they first turned into mottled scales on his skin, before pulling out long flesh tendrils that appeared like flailing tentacles. The sound wave continued spreading outwards with his spirit body fragments, making contact with the sticky liquid within the Obninsk stomach, and they magically bounced back, infusing Alger's body once again. Alger, who was on the brink of losing control, instantly felt better as he seized the opportunity. Without any fear of embarrassing himself, he began singing loudly in a bid to vent the invisible sound waves that would blast his body apart. Rough, messy, off-tune singing filled with a metallic quality spread outwards, wave after wave, mixing with the numerous spirit body fragments before bouncing back on the Obninsk sticky stomach walls. In this process, Alger was like an ingredient being baked in sound waves as he was molded into form. Finally, he regained control of his body, and he grasped his spreading spirituality. At last, Alger closed his eyes as a smile couldn't help but appear on his face. He had completed the first goal he had for all these years, to advance to Ocean Songster. I've gained superficial control of lightning, gaining a more all-round underwater mobility, as well as the ability to use singing to affect targets. The latter ability is different because of every person's uniqueness, producing different branching paths. One of them is to use beautiful singing to disrupt an enemy's spirit body, causing him to turn adrift and fall into a daze. Another is to raise one's explosive strength. Another is to simulate a thunderous boom to leave others in awe. And another is to use chaotic and unpleasant singing to leave the enemy frustrated, causing them to lose their rationality. Alger inspected himself as his expression turned a little odd. He soon put these thoughts away, picked up his items, and swam towards the Obninsk's mouth before gently tapping on the already closed mouth. The mouth slowly opened as it roared suddenly, spewing out everything in its mouth. Alger instantly felt as though he was in midair, as he nearly collided with a shark. After a series of actions, he surfaced and swam towards the Blue Avenger. Only after the ghost ship's outline was reflected in his eyes did he truly heave a sigh of relief. Alger was only worried that something out of the ordinary would happen to the Blue Avenger while he was advancing. Although an hour or two wasn't a huge problem, there were always all kinds of surprises in this world. After receiving Mr. Hangman's gratitude again, Klein returned to the real world, washed, and dried his hands before leaving the washroom and walking towards the dining hall. As the fragrance of food inundated his olfactory senses once again, he slowly drew a breath as he returned to his seat with a smile. As he gestured to the guests, he sat down. At this point, it was already time for dessert. From the looks of it, I stayed too long in the washroom. I hoped that after today there wouldn't be talks about Dwayne Dantes having constipation. Klein silently muttered to himself as he smiled at Ma'am Willis to his right and said, "When I was young, I ate all kinds of strange food in the southern continent. One of them was called tinnet tree plums. They taste like bland butter, just like these desserts." He euphemistically explained the reason for his delay by implying that he had weakened his stomach from his younger days. Chapter 784. Character Assassination. Ma'am Willis glanced at Dwayne Dantes and said with a smile, completely unfazed, "Your past, and your experiences in Desi Bay and the southern continent, are more interesting than any novel I've read. It makes me feel like having a similar experience of my own. Of course, they're just real-life stories that have been tweaked. It's all thanks to Anderson Hood, a hunter that goes everywhere." As Klein cast his gaze on a tiny butter cake, he chuckled. "It's because those are only the interesting ones. There are many that I'd rather not be reminded of." After that simple statement, he began enjoying the dessert. However, when Ma'am Willis and the other ladies heard that, they were somehow reminded of a best-selling novel, A Man with a Story. To them, Dwayne Dantes was such a man. Although he looked like a placid lake, there was more deep down. Hidden there were more pleasant surprises and plenty of pain. The banquet ended 20 minutes to 10. A number of gentlemen and ladies went to the card room to play 2 hours of Texas Hold'em, while the remaining men headed for the activity room to have a chat. They didn't bar women from joining, but as it was inevitable for them to broach on sexual matters while smoking, no women joined them. They either circled the piano at the first story and listened to and sang along with the performer, or they grouped up to play chess. Klein chose to head to the activity room on the second story. Private conversations with a few people had helped him speed up his admission into the circle. After entering the room, he observed the environment and went straight for the windows to open them. Then he pulled a nearby high-back chair to sit down. Just as he did this, he saw the banquet's host, Portland Moment, laugh with a pipe in hand. Men often need some space for themselves. His voice was sonorous, and he had a big build. He was an elder in his 60s with a ruddy complexion and rather thick hair despite being all white. His facial features were the most classic features of a Loanese man with nothing that stood out. Yes, men have to take note of their image when the ladies are around. We have to be considerate about their thoughts. "I've already wanted to kiss this an hour ago." Hazel's father, member of parliament, mocked, took out a gorgeous silver box, taking out a cigar from inside. The other men in the activity room did the same as pipes or cigarettes appeared in their hands, as though they were pulling off a magic trick. As the flames flickered, wisps of smoke began to billow, filling the room as though the smog from yesteryear hadn't dispersed. After enjoying it for a few seconds with his eyes closed, Portland Moment looked to the guests by the window and asked, "Dwayne, do you not smoke?" Klein clenched his fist and placed it to his mouth, coughing slightly as he said, "I have yet to recover." The doctor advised me not to smoke for the time being. To be frank, he was almost choking. Thankfully, he had smartly chosen a seat by the window. This group smoked like chimneys. Klein curled his right index finger and rubbed against his nostrils. He had the urge to use the beyonder powers of a magician to create an invisible air pipe that extended outside to draw in fresh air, so as to escape the harm of secondhand smoke. But considering how there might be beyonders hiding amongst these men, he wisely gave up on the idea. Portland Moment laughed upon hearing that. I heard from Bishop Electra that it's not without reason that you were sick. You lack a wife. This professor was a believer of the god of steam and machinery, but his wife was a believer of the Evernight goddess. Therefore, they had taken up residence in Buckland Street near St. Samuel Cathedral. He often had bishops visiting him and having exchanges. Is he mocking me for thinking about women despite being sick? I really couldn't tell that Bishop Electra is actually a man who likes spreading gossip. It's all Rhodes's fault. Klein lampooned and shook his head with a smile. I place great importance on marriage. I'd rather remain single if there's no one suitable. At this moment, the high-ranking employee of the Backland Municipal Office, Mr. Willis, spewed out smoke and said, "Actually, I envy Dwayne's single status. It allows him to be able to pursue any kind of woman that he likes." He had deliberated enunciated any kind, causing ambiguous laughter to sound out. The matter of Dwayne Dantes's wide preferences, and him never rejecting any charming woman, has already spread across the street. Klein held back his right hand to prevent himself from subconsciously rubbing his temples. He felt that the deep, dignified, handsome, gregarious new tycoon's image was undergoing a subtle change. He first suspected that it was the loudmouth, Bishop Electra, that had spread the news, but later believed that it was Butler Walter, who had proactively gotten the servants to spread the gossip. This was because a nearly flawless, charming gentleman would often be unknowingly ostracized by members of the same sex in a circle. But when a blemish surfaced, with a topic that could be used in jest, it made it easier for him to build closer ties. Klein wasn't angry about such treatment. Instead, he deliberately gave a wry smile in a rather gentlemanly manner. That's why I have difficulty choosing, causing me to remain single to this day. Haha. Portland Moment and company laughed in unison. Member of Parliament mocked then said, "What you need is to be a little more decisive. A good marriage and a good family aids a man greatly." He stopped teasing him and gave serious advice. From the looks of it, no matter which world you're in, you can't escape the fate of being pressured into marriage. Klein nodded gently and glanced out the window, taking in the night scenery of Portland Moment's garden. At this moment he saw a figure. It was Hazel Mocked, who was dressed in a black-green gown, following a trail going deeper into the garden, pausing from time to time to look around, as though she was looking for something. Wasn't this lady playing the piano just now? Why would she suddenly be in the garden? When Klein retracted his gaze, Hazel's figure was blocked by flowers. When guests attend banquets or balls, leaving the hall to head into the garden isn't something impolite. After all, it's a very stylish habit to take a stroll under the moon and take in the flowery aroma of the night winds. However, this often implies a rendezvous. Who's Hazel rendezvousing with? No, it doesn't seem like it. No one that came today is truly her equal. Although she doesn't appear as arrogant after the fright she suffered in the sewers, making her occasionally look depressed, she still seems to belittle ordinary people deep down. She's dealing with the negative effects of the mystical item? That doesn't make sense. Entering a lounge or the washroom would be better than the garden, since there's more privacy. Furthermore, back at the ball held at her place, she also went to the third story, and not the garden. Klein eliminated the various impossibilities and finally had a theory. From the way Hazel is trying to sense or find something, she seems to have noticed some abnormality and plans to observe and deal with it up close. Does this also mean that there's some paranormal activity happening in Professor Portland Moment's house? If that's true, this professor or someone in his family isn't simple at all. The bishops of the St. Samuel Cathedral haven't realized anything despite them visiting often. A marauder's senses and observation skills in certain areas definitely stand out. Klein didn't have any thoughts of intervening in the situation outside. After all, something that Hazel could sense was definitely nothing too dangerous. Besides, St. Samuel Cathedral was nearby. If there were any hidden secrets, no one would attempt to escalate matters, and would instead try to lay low. At this moment, Mocht finally calmed down from an untasteful joke and looked towards Portland Moment. I heard you'll be leaving Backlund University? Professor Portland Moment sucked at his pipe and said, That's right. The Higher Education Commission wishes that I become the Chancellor of the reorganized Backlund University of Technology. Haha, although a large amount of my wealth comes from metal alloys, what I'm best at is mechanical engineering. They've promised to build me a better laboratory there, and also provide me with more funding. At my age, having more autonomy and helpers is more important. Mr. Willis echoed with a smile. And Backlund University will have a full-time professor spot empty up. Those senior associate professors that have been waiting for decades can finally have a chance. In Lone's tertiary education system, full-time professors weren't just a title, but also a post. It was equivalent to a dean, so there was only one. Backlund University of Technology. Klein smiled as he listened, keeping silent on matters he didn't know much about. In the garden, Hazel arrived in a dark and secluded corner. She had discovered that ants and other insects on the ground were gathering in an abnormal manner, and her spiritual perception felt that something was hidden here. This was innate to her sequence, and it had never failed in the past. Without any additional help, she could directly choose the precious items hidden among several sealed boxes. Of course, she wasn't able to distinguish what it was exactly. All she knew was that compared to the rest, what her spiritual perception told her was something definitely more valuable. Just like Mr. Dwayne Dantes, he definitely has extremely precious items on him. Hazel curled the corners of her lips as she cast her gaze at the soil, which looked a little loose. She sensed that copious amounts of spirituality were gathered underneath, thus attracting insects and souls. It's not a human body. It's some spirituality-equipped materials that have been used. They should have been thrown away in batches, but they were instead buried together, causing unnecessary changes. Hazel's eyes turned darker as she interpreted the situation underground based on the unhidden spirituality traits and changes. She tipped her chin slightly and looked back at the building. She believed that Portland Moment's family had at least one person with extraordinary powers. And if this problem in the garden wasn't resolved, the nearby houses would have paranormal activity in the coming days. Hazel retracted her gaze, extended her left hand, and aimed it at the soil. With a gentle grip, she slowly twisted her wrist. The gathered spirituality vanished as though it had been stolen by someone. Chapter 785. Trissy's Discovery 100 Backlund Street. In a corner of the garden in Portland Moment's residence. The many ants and worms that were gathering there slowly dispersed as the cold, creepy sensation faded. That person with extraordinary powers likely doesn't have any experience. With her goal achieved, Hazel nodded indiscernibly before turning around briskly and strolling through the garden. She wasn't in a rush to return as she enjoyed the crimson moonlight, the cold air, and the faint flowery scent. After a long while, Hazel stopped her stroll and left the garden, entering the hall on the first story. At this moment, apart from the guests still playing Texas Hold'em, many ladies and gentlemen had bid farewell. Moments after Hazel found her mother, Ma'am Rihanna, she saw her father, Member of Parliament Mocked, and a few other gentlemen walking down as they conversed with lively expressions. Are you ready to head home? You have to visit a very important guest tomorrow morning. As Rihanna gestured for her daughter to come close, she walked towards her husband and greeted the others with a smile. Mock nodded and said, I would have loved to try another of Portland's cigars if not for that matter. Rihanna swept her gaze to Willis, Dwayne Dantes and company, and she asked in passing, Gentlemen, what are you talking about? It sounds interesting. Mock turned his body to the side and said with a smile, Dwayne said that he encountered ghosts when he was in the southern continent. He and his companions suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and found themselves unable to open their eyes. Their bodies were heavy, as though someone was pressing on them. They used a great deal of strength before escaping such a state, and left their beds. However, they discovered their rooms were extremely cold. You might not know this, but East Balam's weather is hot most of the time. Then, Dwayne and his companions each held double-barreled hunting rifles, and stood guard the entire night. They frantically left the town after the sun rose. After hearing that, Ma'am Rihanna looked at Dwayne Dantes with piqued interest. Is that true? Do ghosts really exist? Klein shook his head with a smile. That I'm not sure of. Perhaps my companions and I had just experienced a harrowing adventure, and our bodies and minds weren't in the best of conditions. This might have resulted in all kinds of problems. The stories he told were sourced from one of Anderson's experiences. Back when the strongest hunter of the Fog Sea was exploring a temple in the primitive forest, he chanced upon a specter, creating a large-scale breakout overnight. Ghosts. Hazel turned her head to look towards the garden, as the corners of her mouth curved up slightly before she held back. She didn't say a word as she quietly listened to her parents bidding the rest of them farewell, before returning home together. Late at night, Hazel, who had changed into a sleeping gown, walked to the balcony and stood behind a gap in the curtains. She looked towards the sewer manhole on Buckland Street. As she looked at it, her face gradually turned pale, as though she had recalled an experience filled with pain and horror. She forced herself to retract her gaze, took 2 deep breaths, and turned around to walk to her bedside. During this process, she bit gently on her lip and muttered silently, "That was likely a wraith. Definitely. I need items or charms in the sun domain." While Hazel was looking at the manhole, Klein was also doing the same. It's been days. I wonder how well that demoness, Trissy, has recovered and whether she has left or not. Thankfully, after Hazel was given a scare by me, she hasn't dared to approach the manhole. Klein's gaze swept the iron-black street lamps as he nodded slightly. He opened the iron cigar case and made his wraith marionette appear within the full-body mirror. He had already decided to send Senior down the sewers to check the area to confirm Trissy's condition. He didn't want that demoness to cause any trouble. Furthermore, the sewers were just physically too close to his identity as Dwayne Dantes. Klein didn't wish for Trissy to be in the vicinity any longer, wishing that she could recover soon and take action. That would prompt her to leave Buckland Street. Having Admiral of Blood Senior appear every once in a while would fulfill the character setting I previously created. It doesn't live nearby, and because the sewers contains a secret, it often wanders around in search of it. As Klein was thinking, he made the marionette in the ancient triangular hat leap onto the street lamp's surface, before passing through the manhole cover in a wraith form, quickly approaching the hidden fork where Trissy hid herself at. Before reaching the dead end, Senior, who had night vision, could see that the area was empty. She's already recovered and left? Klein thought as he made the marionette continue forward, stopping at the spot where Trissy was previously sitting. He discovered that the place was tidied up. Not only was the ground not muddy and moist, even the moss on the walls and corner had vanished. There isn't any leftover food either. That fellow became a germaphobe after becoming a woman? No, perhaps he was like that to begin with. With Senior's vision, Klein surveyed the area and determined that either Trissy hadn't left, or she hadn't left for more than a day. Otherwise, it was impossible to maintain the cleanliness of the place. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, light footsteps sounded into the wraith's ear. Under his control, Senior retraced his steps, and wasn't surprised to see Trissy in her black dress. This demoness had her luscious black hair cascading down, unlike peers her age who had different hairstyles. It was simple and neat, matched with her pale face that had just recovered some of its ruddiness. Trissy looked like a dreamy flower that was silently blooming in the night. As expected of a demoness, thankfully, there's a marionette in between us. Otherwise, I would just end up staring at her. Haha, a dead person won't be enticed. No matter how charming a demoness is, there's no way they can make the deceased climb out of a tomb like a zombie. Klein lampooned as he looked at Trissy, who had a blank expression, but was secretly wary, having released the invisible threads. "Where did you go?" Trissy pricked up her brows and said, "Would you like to relieve yourself where you sleep?" I thought a demoness wouldn't need to use the washroom. Klein gave a self-deprecating comment and made Senior chuckle. Are you referring to pissing and shitting? He had deliberately made the marionette say such words, as it matched Admiral of Blood's persona of a boorish pirate. Trissy indiscernibly frowned and said, Is there anything else? Senior didn't continue on the topic as he said, You look like you've almost recovered. Trissy smiled. Not bad. I'll be leaving tomorrow. She paused as she slightly narrowed her slender eyes. To be frank, I doubt whether you're the real Admiral of Blood at times. Of course it's real. You should ask if he's alive or dead. With his interest piqued, Klein made Senior ask, Why do you say that? Trissy's gaze swept over the wraith's face and said, It's said that Admiral of Blood is someone who indulges in his desires, and he has no resistance towards beautiful females and males. Yet, I don't see any sparks of desire when you face me. I believe the real Admiral of Blood would have added the condition of doing something I wouldn't want to in the agreement. Klein deliberated for 2 seconds and made Senior give a self-deprecating smile. I'm afraid of finding myself lost to pleasure and ending up being controlled by you. Trissy's expression instantly changed. This was indeed one of the reasons why she had raised the topic. To a demoness of pleasure, beyonders who habitually indulged in their desires were natural prey. Klein actively ignored the topic and made the marionette say, You're seeking out the target tomorrow? Very clearly, the Royal Guard captain knows you and knows what you look like. After all, you were arranged by them to be by Prince Edisac's side. Klein silently added. Trissy lowered her head and looked at her toes before chuckling. Rest at ease, I have the perfect plan. As she spoke, she turned her body sideways and casually looked deep into the sewers. If you set off from here, at the end of the 6th left fork is a hidden passage. It has signs of prolonged human activity. Haha. I discovered it while walking around in the past few days. I believe it has something to do with that girl, right? It's also the reason why you're here. Hidden passage. Klein didn't confirm or deny it. He made Senior smile and say, Did you discover anything? Trissy shook her head. There was nothing at all. Perhaps only a certain pathway, or someone with a specific item, can find the clues. A marauder's intuition, or something on Hazel's person. Klein didn't make Senior continue on the topic, as he pressed his hand to his chest and bowed with a smile. Since you've recovered, I can be at ease. The moment he said that, he suddenly vanished. Trissy focused her eyes into a stare, but it was to no avail. Only when the invisible thread she had released was hit by a breeze did she retract her gaze, confirming that Admiral of Blood had really left. At that moment, Klein had brought the wraith back to the manhole, without attempting to explore the spot which Trissy had mentioned. There were 3 reasons for his decision. First, it had exceeded 100 meters. Second, he suspected that he wouldn't find anything since he wasn't from the marauder pathway, nor did he have the corresponding items. Third, Trissy was still around. Furs woke up naturally on a Sunday morning as she got up to wash up. As she chewed on a fresh piece of toast, she retrieved a stack of items from her mailbox. As she walked to the coffee table with a cup of coffee on it, she casually flipped through the items and discovered a reply letter she had been looking forward to. Throwing down the papers, bills, and other letters, Furs tore open the envelope. Teacher is already in Backlund? Furs quickly read through the letter as she muttered in surprise. At the same time, she saw the toast in her mouth plunge to the ground. Chapter 786. Accounting Fraud Hat Trick in on Sherwood Burrows 22, Hope Street. Just as the attendant at the front desk was about to drink some water, she saw a lady walk in. The lady was about 1.65 meters tall, and she wore a light-colored dress with frilly sides. Her brown curly hair cascaded down as she wore colored glasses. She looked casual, just like someone who had just returned from Desi Bay. She held a dark brown leather suitcase as she unhurriedly walked to the front desk. A lady with extraordinary disposition. Her attire is nice. How I wish I could see what she looks like without her glasses. As a female, the attendant habitually sized up her clothes and accessories. She then heard the lady say in a languid tone, 1 night. A single room. 2 solely and 8 pence. The attendant gave her the room rate for the day and directly asked, "Do you have any identification documents?" She wasn't too adamant about registering her identity, because the inn had no means of confirming the authenticity of the documents. Yes, the lady put down her dark brown suitcase and took out an identification document from her handbag before passing it to her. "Margaret Taylor," the attendant muttered as she registered her before finding a bunch of keys. "Room 2012. "Thank you." The lady in fashionable attire received the keys, carried the dark brown suitcase, and walked towards the staircase. At this moment, an attendant in a red vest came over. He bowed and asked, "How may I help you?" He immediately cast his gaze on the dark brown suitcase. The lady curled her lips into a smile as she shook her head. "There's no need. It's very light." With that said, she didn't stop as she walked up the stairs and entered room 2012. Only after she closed the door and put down the suitcase did she raise her right hand to her chest, letting out a long sigh of relief. "Why do I feel like a psychotic murderer?" She was none other than the disguised Furs. There was nothing in her suitcase, except for Mr. X's head, which was wrapped in newspapers. The two attendants from before probably wouldn't have guessed that a fashionable lady didn't have any clothes, facial products, or makeup in her suitcase, but a cracked, bloody head. If they were to discover that, everyone in the inn would be given a fright. This is source material for a detective novel. Furs calmed her feelings of anxiousness and picked up her suitcase again and opened the door. She observed the corridor and saw no one walking through it. She hurriedly walked out and headed for room 2016 and rapped on the wooden door. Her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham, was living in the same room he previously used. After sensing someone sizing her up through the peephole, Furs heard the doorknob twist as the gears unlocked. Dorian Gray was dressed in a black suit with very broad shoulders. He looked to the left and right warily before making way, allowing his student to enter. "No one noticed you, right?" Following that, he closed the door and asked cautiously. Furs put down the suitcase and removed the colored glasses that hid half her face. "No, I used a fake identity. As a Beyonder in Backland with rather rich experience as a low-sequence Beyonder, having a few fake identification documents was necessary. Furthermore, she had Zio's expert help in such matters. The only problem was that it was ultimately a fake identity that couldn't stand up to police scrutiny. However, Furs had heard that there were places where real identity documentation could be obtained. Furthermore, they were documents which the police department had a record of, with the pictures swapped. Of course, the price was much more expensive. Dorian nodded gently and silently exhaled. As he got Furs to sit, he brought a chair over and said, "You mentioned that someone is paying to find the direct descendants of the Abraham family at a Beyonder gathering in Backland? And the goal is to find information on Mr. Dorr?" "Yes, teacher." Furs said nothing but the truth. "I don't know much about the family, so I thought of asking you to see if you knew anything." She hit 2 points, namely the Beyonder gathering being called the Tarot Gathering, and that she long knew that her teacher was a member of the Abraham family. Dorian sat down and drank a sip from a white porcelain teacup. He asked with a calm expression, "Who was the one asking?" "I'm not sure. I can only confirm that it was a woman. She had concealed her appearance. She seemed very powerful and must have quite a strong backing." Furs described her impression of Ma'am Hermit. What she didn't say was that this woman had close ties with Queen Mystic Bernadette. Dorian Gray pondered for a few seconds before saying, "I don't know much either. All I know is that Mr. Dorr is the ancestor of the Abraham family. He vanished during the War of the Four Emperors. You can try using this piece of information to get some of the bounty." "Mr. Dorr is the Abraham family's ancestor?" Mr. Dorr, who made the Abraham family suffer the curse of the full moon, causing many members to lose control, is actually the Abraham family's ancestor? Furs was alarmed. Having already learned some of the problems of the Abraham family from Mr. Fool, she couldn't believe that the cause of all of this was the source of the bloodline. Does Mr. Dorr not know the consequences of his actions? Furs muttered silently as she couldn't help but frown. Dorian Gray noticed his student's abnormal reaction as he asked, somewhat puzzled, "Is there a problem?" "Oh no, I didn't manage to hide my expression." Furs deliberated and said, I just don't understand. It's been more than 1,000 years. So apart from the Abraham family's direct descendants, who would wish to gather information on Mr. Dorr and why? Perhaps they're trying to find Mr. Dorr? All right. Queen Mystic is Emperor Roselle's daughter in Mr. Dorr has appeared in Emperor Roselle's diary. Therefore, the Queen is trying to find Mr. Dorr to figure out the truth of the past. That's normal. However, Mr. Dorr vanished in the War of the Four Emperors, more than 1,000 years before Emperor Roselle's era. How did they manage to contact each other? Could it be that Emperor Roselle could also hear the full moon ravings? I remember Mr. Dorr making a remark that Mr. Dorr might be calling for help. If that's the case, it's really. As an author, Furs was momentarily at a loss for words to describe her feelings. Dorian revealed a wry smile and said, "Certainly. I'm also puzzled about this problem. Remember to tell me if you find the answer." Furs didn't harp on this matter, afraid that Dorian Gray would notice anything amiss. She then said, "Teacher, why did you suddenly come to Backlund?" Dorian smiled and picked up a cigarette as he raised it to his nose to give it a whiff. Without lighting it, he said, "I happen to have some matters that need me to be in Backlund. I also decided to check on your digestion progress." In fact, he had been alarmed by Furs's letter. He couldn't believe that anyone in the world would still be asking about Mr. Dorr. One had to know that even the Abraham family had given up such attempts. He was the only one who kept at it, teaching students on his own accord. This also made him recall a prophecy that was passed around within the family. The Abrahams were increasingly approaching their destruction. When he connected the two matters together, he rushed over to Backlund to confirm his student's situation. He wished that she could advance as soon as possible, leaving some hope for the Abraham family. "I just grasped the various astrological knowledge," Furs replied, feeling a little guilty. Due to her lack of money, she hadn't bought the high-quality crystal ball needed by an astrologer. To not continue on this topic, Furs began asking Dorian Gray about the acting principles needed for astrologer, obtaining advice such as astrology isn't all-powerful. Towards the end, Furs glanced at the dark brown suitcase beside her and said, "Teacher, there's one more matter." "What is it?" Dorian leaned back into his chair as he leisurely drank a mouthful of black tea. Furs followed the script she had prepared and said, "After knowing that Louis Veen betrayed the organization, inflicting a great deal of harm upon all of you, I've always had the thought of finding him and exacting revenge for all of you." "Give up that thought." Dorian sat up straight. "Even if you have Lamino's travels, you are no match for him, much less able to kill him. I'm very glad that you have such thoughts, but there's no need to take unnecessary risks." "I'm definitely not able to do it alone," Furs mumbled silently before saying, "I got to know a very powerful bounty hunter. I spend about £10,000 to seek his help." She wasn't able to estimate the cost of the job, so she had used the price that Miss Audrey paid when previously entrusting them to kill the Intis ambassador. That might be a cheat. Louis Veen is likely a traveler, and he has the support of the Aurora Order. Dorian didn't hold any hopes of any bounty hunter being Louis Veen's match when he heard his student say, "He has already succeeded." Cough, cough, cough. Dorian choked on his saliva as he broke out into a fit of coughs. He dropped the teacup to the ground, but it bounced up like magic, firmly landing on the coffee table. "He has given me Louis Veen's head." Furs held up the dark brown suitcase and opened it, taking out the spherical object which was wrapped in newspapers. With the newspapers unfolded bit by bit, Dorian saw that face he would never forget. The smug smile on Louis Veen's face back when he attacked the Abraham family's headquarters was gone. His head was covered in cracks, as though it had been glued together piece by piece. It was gruesome, filled with pain and despair. As an astrologer, Dorian Gray's spiritual intuition told him that it was undoubtedly Louis Veen's head. "Good, very good," Dorian muttered in excitement before looking up at his student. "Who was the bounty hunter? I can't imagine Backlund having such a powerful bounty hunter." Furs hesitated for a moment before saying, "Gairman Sparrow." Chapter 787. Dorian's warning Gehrman Sparrow. Dorian felt the vessels on his forehead pulse when he heard that as he held his hands together, tensing up without realizing it. Situated in Pritz Harbor, he inevitably learned of the various news at sea, both actively and passively, knowing far more than the residents in Backlund who relied on the newspapers. In recent months, he often heard from different channels of information about Gehrman Sparrow. From killing Steele Mavady, to severely injuring Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, to successfully hunting Admiral of Blood Seigneur. All these stories were colored with mania. He left the sea and came to Backlund. He hasn't changed his trait of craziness. Dorian held back the horror and wariness that subconsciously rose in his heart as he looked at his student and said in a deep voice, "It's best that you minimize your communication with that bounty hunter. He's bound to get into big trouble one day, and it wouldn't take long for that to happen." Teacher is indeed experienced and has great acumen. He instantly saw through Mr. World's intrinsic nature. Unfortunately, I'm already a member of the Tarot Club, so it's impossible not to communicate with him. Furs adjusted her state of mind and sincerely nodded. "Yes, teacher." Dorian composed himself and once again looked at his former student and current enemy, Louis Veen. However, this traveler could no longer speak. He didn't even have an iota of spirituality left. After a few seconds of silence, Dorian leaned back slightly and looked at Furs. "You mentioned paying £10,000 for the job?" He wasn't aware of Furs's financial situation, other than knowing that his student was a best-selling author, who likely earned quite a bit from her royalties. Furthermore, she seemed to be doing quite well in the few Beyonder circles with transactions that rewarded handsomely. Therefore, it wasn't too surprising or unacceptable that she could save up £10,000. Furs fidgeted, feeling a slight guilty conscience as she said, "Is it too expensive?" She deliberately asked a question in order to hide the fact that she had mentioned a fake number, so as to show that she didn't have much experience in such matters. Dorian shook his head. "No, it's too cheap. It's so cheap that I suspect whether Gehrman Sparrow has other motives." As a member of the Abraham family which had suffered numerous setbacks, he often maintained a relatively high level of wariness. In the professional terminology of various clubs and gatherings, that's called a membership fee. Furs lampooned as she frankly said. There were other conditions, including everything on Louis Veen's person belonging to him, as well as the requirement of me providing him help. Also, I promised that if he's in need of cash in the future, I will compensate him an additional £3,000. That's reasonable, but just barely. Dorian nodded gently and said, "Usually, assassinating Louis Veen, who had the Aurora Order backing him, would cost at least £30,000. And if there are other situations, the price will be higher." Back then, Mr. World had used demigod powers recorded in Lamino's travels. He probably encountered something else. An Aurora Order saint? Having had an edifying experience exerted on her by the Tarot Club, Furs wasn't unfamiliar with the Aurora Order's structure. She didn't hide her frown as she said, "From the looks of it, it's indeed a little abnormal. Perhaps he's in desperate need of cash." Dorian thought and said, "Perhaps he cares more about Louis Veen's Beyonder characteristic. To the Beyonders of other pathways, it can be forged into a rather useful mystical item, as long as he finds a suitable artisan." Dorian paused for 2 seconds before adding, "There's no need to worry about that. Just stay away from him in the future." Perhaps he had long targeted Louis Veen, and he was just using the information you provided to carry out the assassination, while still getting an additional bonus. Dorian didn't continue on the topic, as he took out a fist-sized pure crystal ball from his pocket. It's made of star crystal, and it can effectively raise your astromancy. The light shone in from outside the window as resplendent waves surfaced within the crystal ball. Without waiting for Furs to reject, Dorian chuckled. "Louis Veen is my enemy. The payment used to get rid of him should be paid by me. I don't have that much cash at the moment, and I can only use some items to deduct from the payment." "No, there's no need." Furs shook her head, partially genuine, but partially in contradiction to her will. It was genuine because she only wanted to seek revenge for her teacher back, when she thought of getting rid of Louis Veen, without considering the possible rewards she could later receive. It was in contradiction to her will, because she couldn't reject the reward. Dorian said with a stern expression. Do you wish for me to be ashamed and uneasy? Don't worry. I still have quite a bit of wealth. Furs nodded in response. All right then. Dorian smiled once again. Also, I've brought you the scribe potion formula. You can gather the corresponding ingredients as you digest the astrologer potion. Haha. I'll prepare one of the main ingredients for you. The brain of an Asman. You'll have to rely on yourself for the rest. An Asman was said to be a monster that existed in ancient times. It looked like an unprotected human brain that could fill a room. Not only could it create terrifying illusions, but it could also make its attackers die from their own attacks. As he spoke, Dorian took out a yellowish-brown goatskin and passed it to Furs. Furs received it in gratitude and quickly scanned the list of main ingredients. One complete brain of an Asman, cursed artifact of an ancient wraith. I hope I can gather the remaining ingredients before I finish digesting the astrologer potion. Just as Furs rolled up the goatskin, she saw Dorian take out a pure golden box from his suitcase. After removing the wall of spirituality, Dorian opened the box as he said, without the gold enclosing it, the brain of an Asman will constantly affect you, causing you to hallucinate until you lose your mental facilities. Inside the squarish box was a blob of grayish-white, translucent, and wrinkled object. It was about a fifth the size of Louis Vine's head. As expected of a family with a long history, Furs sincerely thanked him once again, and received the golden box, and skillfully closed it, and used a wall of spirituality to seal it. Dorian didn't stop, and instead gave an excuse for Furs to stay back. He set up a ritual, and summoned the void creature Malmouth who enjoyed music. He then took out 2 documents from the creature's spherical body. He had prepared the 3 items for Furs when he received the shocking news regarding Mr. Dorr. Therefore, he had it on him. These are 2 pieces of property in Backlund. One of them is in Hillston Borough, and the other is in Sherwood Borough. They are in excellent locations, and should have a total valuation of about £6,500. The amount you can sell them for will be yours, Dorian said with a smile. Although the Abraham family was in a state of decline, as a former angel family with a long history, it still had quite a bit of resources, including land, tree farms, property, manors, and mines. However, Dorian only had control over a few, with most of the remainder belonging to the various smaller families. The place I'm renting costs £2,500, and is in an okay district, but an average location. What teacher gave me today does add up to about £10,000. Furs couldn't help but sigh inwardly. In the Holy Wind Cathedral, deep blue officiant Randall Valentinus looked at the mandated Punisher deacon and said, Any findings? The new Backlund archbishop was a middle-aged man with a domineering demeanor. His dark blue hair was thick, and he had large earlobes. His eyes seemed to constantly hide lightning and storms within them. The mandated Punisher deacon standing before his desk was a thin middle-aged man, wearing a modified captain's hat. His looks didn't stand out, but there was an anchor tattoo on his neck. The man answered reverently, Your Eminence, we've already caught some of the members who participated in the gathering. However, they have no idea who the rest are, much less know of the person who assassinated Mr. X. According to their description, the assailant was about 6 meters tall and likely female. We can't rule out the possibility that it's a short man. Randall held back his anger and asked, What do you plan on doing next? As we are temporarily unable to know who Mr. X invited to the gathering, and 6-meter-tall women are common, our plan is to relax our stance on the surface, as we target a few suspicious targets, and convert those we've caught into informants. Without us exerting any danger, those bunch of lunatics from the Aurora Order will definitely seek out the murderer themselves in order to avenge Mr. X. They'll likely do a carpet search, and this way, not only will we find the assassin, but we can also discover more clues to the Aurora Order. The thin middle-aged man explained in detail. Randall nodded in thought and said, Roy, when taking action, remember to apply for a Grade 1 sealed artifact. The situation is clear that the Aurora Order has at least a saint in Backlund, and the assassin's strength is greater than the typical Sequence 5 Beyonder, and they similarly have a demigod backing them. Yes, Your Eminence. Roy Wellesley struck the left side of his chest with his right fist. Dwayne, you often exceed my expectations. It hasn't taken you long to finish studying the revelation of Evernight's Book of Wisdom. Inside St. Samuel Cathedral, Bishop Electra closed the Bible in his hands and smiled at the pious tycoon with gray sideburns and deep blue eyes. Klein laughed and replied, "This is expected of a believer. Next up is the study of the letters of the saints." "Yes, which saint do you wish to begin with?" Electra asked. Klein looked to his sides and chuckled. "Let's do St. Samuel then." Electra wasn't surprised at that as he seriously introduced. St. Samuel was a Backland archbishop during the fourth epoch of the Trunsoist Empire. He contributed greatly to the spreading of the goddess's faith and entered her divine kingdom before dying, becoming an angel. As he spoke, he flipped to the corresponding letters of the saints. At this moment, Klein's spiritual perception was triggered. He felt a deep sense of evil and diabolical will spread above him. Following that, a cold and quiet feeling extended from underground, leveling everything and restoring the cathedral to its former tranquility. Bishop Electra snapped out of his daze and said to Dwayne Dantes, who didn't seem to detect anything, "Sorry, I just recalled something." Chapter 788. Hidden Passage. "It's fine," Klein replied with a warm smile. Although he didn't seem to notice anything, thoughts were flying through his mind. He began considering what the anomaly that happened during that instant meant. Previously, the keepers would head upstairs along the nearby staircase. It can be preliminary determined that they live there, coinciding with the area where the anomaly happened. The keepers aren't in the best of conditions, so the chances of them losing control are greater than ordinary beyonders, causing them to suddenly release a sense of an evil and diabolical will. And this was suppressed and quelled by the core seal deep behind Cheney's gate? If that's the case, there are two possibilities. 1. The core seal behind Cheney's gate can sense all the anomalies in St. Samuel Cathedral, and then react instinctively. 2. During the keeper's watch over the years, they are constantly corroded by the core seal's powers. In a certain sense, they are a part of it, or they bear the weight of the corresponding traits. Once any abnormalities happen, their bodies will immediately intervene. If it's the former, that means that when I knock a keeper unconscious and replace him, it will easily be detected by the core seal behind Cheney's gate. It will produce an anomaly like before, causing my plan to fail right at the beginning. If it's the latter, I'll definitely be repelled when entering Cheney's gate, even when disguised as a keeper. I need to figure out the problem before coming up with a direct countermeasure. It's really difficult to steal sealed artifacts from the various churches. It's no wonder almost no one is willing to do so. As Klein's thoughts wandered, he superficially paid attention to Bishop Electra's explanation of St. Samuel's experiences and letters that he left behind. When it was almost time, he politely bade him farewell. After returning to 160 Buckland Street, he saw his butler approach just as he handed his hat and cane to Richardson. "Sir, do you plan on holding a ball or banquet next weekend and invite the neighbors?" Walter wasn't using a suggestive tone, but a tone of inquiry. However, Klein knew very well that since his butler had raised the matter, it meant that it was almost time. He nodded gently and said, "Saturday night then. A ball. I'll have to trouble you and Tanaja to make the preparations. Is there enough money?" When saying the last statement, Klein looked to his housekeeper. Tanaja sternly nodded and said, "There's enough. The various alcoholic beverages in your wine cellar is enough to handle several banquets." When moving into 160 Buckland Street, Klein had handed her £1,000 in cash for the household expenses. From the looks of it, even with the need to replenish fine wine, tea leaves, and coffee beans, it wasn't something that could be spent in a month. The gold pound is rather strong after all. Klein nodded and smiled. "Let's not use wine that's too expensive for our first ball. It's common to be reserved in loan." "Yes, sir." Although Walter was very aware of how to run a ball, he still paid serious attention to his employer's instructions. He paused and said, "There are only two things you need to do. First, it's to settle the guest list with our help. thinking up some small talk for each guest, matching the person's corresponding status and experience. Second, it's to order a suit for the ball. How troublesome. When greeting Hazel, can I say that the sewers here are cleaner than the squares in the southern continent? As Klein sighed and lampooned, he nodded slightly. No problem. Deep into the night, the crimson moon hung high in the sky. The smog which had significantly thinned made Backlund have an additional sense of tranquility. In Dwayne Dantes' master bedroom, Klein set up a ritual to summon himself. He planned on entering the sewers tonight to confirm that Trissy had left. He then planned on heading for the fork she had described, to explore the so-called hidden passageway to see if he could discover anything. Klein didn't have extravagant hopes of gaining anything. He was only worried that the secret hidden in the sewers would pose a hidden risk that would one day explode. This could easily involve Dwayne Dantes, who lived nearby, spoiling his plans and stealing the Antigonus family's notebook. On this matter, I can't be an ostrich that buries its head in the sand and pretend not to know anything. I should discover the problem early and destroy what needs destroying or report what needs reporting before it completely erupts. That's the most effective solution. Of course, I also need to be sufficiently careful. I mustn't let my exploration end up lighting a fuse. Klein's spirit body tore out of the candlelight, and with Azek's copper whistle augmenting him, he possessed the physical body of Dwayne Dantes, controlling him to walk to the boundary of the wall of spirituality and sit in the reclining chair. To the external world, it looked as though the tycoon had dozed off reading the papers. Summoning my soul to possess my own body feels different from returning to my body. There's an obvious barrier in between. Klein did a comparison of the experience and floated to his desk, cleaning up most of the items on the altar and leaving behind the candle that maintained his summoning to burn silently. After doing all of this, Klein wore creeping hunger, and with Azek's copper whistle, death knell, and the senior gold coin in possession, he flew out of the master bedroom and left 160 Buckland Street, drilling into the sewers. Just as Klein found himself in the moist and dirty environment, he immediately released Wraith Senior and made his marionette open up a distance from him, turning into the hidden fork where Trissy was previously recuperating. This time, he saw that the clean region in the sewers was already stained with dirt containing signs of rats. From the looks of it, Trissy has really left. Klein, who was following far behind, heaved a sigh of relief. As a spirit body, he didn't need to breathe, nor did he need to walk on the ground. Therefore, he didn't mind how disgusting the sewers were. Senior walked out of the area and continued walking ahead and turned on the sixth left turn. Klein constantly maintained a distance of 50 meters, perfectly acting the role of the person behind the scenes. At the end of the fork was a corroded wall covered in moss. At a glance, there weren't any abnormalities to it. If Trissy hadn't mentioned it, Klein wouldn't have gotten his marionette to observe every inch of the area in detail. A few minutes later, Senior suddenly straightened his back and walked forward, entering the wall. Passing through the rather thick obstacle, Klein's eyes opened up. With the marionette's vision, he saw a half-natural, half-artificial cave. It wasn't more than 8 meters high and was about 3 meters wide. The ground was littered with tools like shovels which were wrapped in oilskin, and large piles of mud and rubble. Right up ahead were 2 hidden passageways that extended downwards. The left one was about 5 to 6 meters deep, while the one on the right was nearly 10 meters deep. However, nothing seemed to have existed in them, as though they were still being excavated. This was dug up by Hazel? In the day, she's an arrogant lady of high society, and at night, she's an excavator in the sewers? Furthermore, she's moving the dirt and rubble one pail at a time? She was loitering around to find the exact spot, and digging was the subsequent step? That wall must have been a secret door. Klein hid himself at the fork's entrance as he made Senior scrutinize the area. Following that, he made the wraith enter the left passage until he reached a completely sealed-off area. Senior's figure slowly turned faint as it turned incorporeal. In this state, he passed through the soil and explored deeper. But even when reaching the 100-meter limit, he didn't discover anything of use. All he saw were ordinary insects and worms. Klein made the marionette switch directions, swimming, in the sea of soil without finding anything. Senior soon returned to the cave from before, and entered the right passageway, without being affected by any obstacles. There's still nothing. It's not without reason that Trissy determined that it will only work for a particular pathway, or being in possession of a certain item. She must have probed the area with the invisible threads of a demoness of pleasure. Unfortunately, I've already lost Tinder. I wonder if the gray fog's aura on me would work. It seems to strongly attract beyonders from the Marauder pathway, Klein silently commented, and, using his spirit body state, planned on personally visiting the 2 hidden passageways that Hazel had dug up. However, he curbed his desire because he was now a marionettist. Doing it personally in situations that didn't require it was in violation of the acting principles. It's fine even if I don't use the gray fog's aura. I'll just request to purchase a mystical item from the Marauder pathway during tomorrow afternoon's tarot gathering. It doesn't need to be too expensive. It can just correspond to sequence 8 or 9. That badge from Lenevis is only a signal receiver, not an item of this pathway. While not aware of the exact situation of what's hiding inside, rashly using my spirit body to explore it might result in me attracting a high-sequence monster. Being careful and cautious will forever be a condition for myself. Klein slowly heaved a sigh of relief and retrieved Wraith Senior. He wasn't worried that Hazel would continue coming in the near future. Any person with normal intelligence wouldn't continue coming unless they had the means to deal with the situation from before. Ignoring how Hazel hasn't had any contact with Beyonder circles. Even if she has, getting an item from the Sun domain isn't simple. After all, Backlund is the territory of the Church of Storms. I do have something that I don't use often. Haha, can I find an opportunity to sell it to her, and then let her use it to harm my marionette? Klein jeered at himself before shaking his head with a laugh. He ended the summoning and returned above the gray fog, vanishing from the sewers. On Monday morning, the bright sunlight tore through the thin clouds, shining onto every corner of Backlund. Emlyn White pulled down on his silk top hat. As he left the carriage and walked to the Harvest Church, he squinted his eyes and mumbled, "What terrible weather! Backlund's worst season is coming soon." He was just about to step onto the stairs when he saw a paperboy approach him, handing him a copy of the Tussock Times. "Sir, today's morning papers." Emlyn wanted to reject it when he discovered a small slip clasped in the middle of the boy's fingers. Emlyn maintained his countenance as he took out a penny and passed it to the boy, receiving the copy of the Tussock Times and the slip. Before entering the Harvest Church, he quickly spread it open and scanned it. "There are clues to the people you are looking for. Please come to the Bravehearts Bar." Chapter 789. Each person's Monday 9:30 a.m. Backlund Bridge area. Iron Gate Street Bravehearts Bar. Emlyn White stood rooted to his spot after he got down from the carriage. He stared ahead in a daze, nearly forgetting to avoid the sunlight. At that moment, the bar's main door was shut with no signs of it opening. As a sanguine who seldom left his home, and only went to places like bars at night, Emlyn never expected the bar to be closed in the morning. He had left the Harvest Church in a rush via the transportation system after seeing the paper slip, hoping to obtain any first-hand intelligence. To save time, he even tolerated the cramped environment and stench of the metro. At that moment, Emlyn was somewhat peeved, but he knew that he had made the mistake. All he could do was pull a face and circle around Iron Gate Street to not waste his trip. Just as he was about to approach a rental carriage that stood along the street, he caught sight of a familiar figure from the corner of his eye. The person was wearing a brown rounded top hat and an old coat while carrying a ragged haversack. He was none other than Ian, the underground arms dealer and intelligence merchant. I have quite good intuition. I knew he would appear early. Emlyn was delighted as he stuffed his hands into his pockets and leisurely walked over, blocking Ian's way as he chuckled. "Good morning." Ian looked up and glanced at the handsome man before him, replying in puzzlement, "Good morning, Mr. White. You should have come in the evening." "It seems to be a suitable time now," Emlyn said with a smile, clearly in a good mood. "Ian, why do you always wear the same clothes and outfit every time I see you?" Ian answered without minding the question. This can make me appear more mature while allowing me to keep a low profile. Of course, the main reason is that I lack money. The final sentence was added with a joking tone. I look forward to your attire in summer, Emlyn said with a scoff. I'll take off my coat. As Ian spoke, he took out 2 pieces of paper from his ragged haversack. They were the bounty notices that Emlyn had previously given him. Someone in East Borough saw this person. He handed over one of the papers to Emlyn, and on it was the name Argos. Realizing that there really were clues to the primordial moon believers, Emlyn asked in delight, "Where is he?" Ian didn't reply as he looked at him with a silent smile. Experienced, Emlyn immediately took out his wallet and gave £150 to Ian. That's your reward. Ian smiled and said, There's still another half to go. Another half? Emlyn nearly wanted to let this merchant in front of him know the prowess of a sanguine. This was because an effective clue cost £20, while an exact location costs £150. However, he quickly read between the lines as he asked in pleasant surprise. Another one was found? Yes. Ian handed him the remaining piece of paper in his hand. While my friend observed Argos and confirmed his residence, it was discovered that he had met with this person named Gallus Kevin. Therefore, I've obtained the residence of the 2 targets at the same time. Very good. Emlyn emptied his wallet and gave another £150 to Ian. He was abnormally delighted. He felt that the ancestor and Mr. Fool were blessing him. This was because there were only 5 targets, and he had successfully hunted one. Now, with 2 additional clues, all he needed to do was succeed in order to declare himself victor regardless of what the other sanguine did. Ian seriously counted and checked the notes before saying with a suppressed voice, Argos is on the 3rd story of the apartment block at East Borough 6, Limestone Street, opposite the public washroom. Gallus Kevin is similarly in East Borough. He stays in the room beside the staircase on the 1st floor at 19, Beluga Whale Street. I will confirm your intelligence. I believe you wouldn't wish to abandon your business for a mere £300. Emlyn nodded gently as he gave a warning. Following that, he chuckled and said, They were found so easily? Ian's red eyes darted around slightly as he said, First, many bounty hunters are my friends. They have many informants in East Borough. Second, those 2 gentlemen didn't have great disguises. Despite being in East Borough, they wore very different attire from the people around them. If they were willing to wear more ragged clothes and did more than 12 hours of labor work, I believe they would be hard to find in the messy East Borough. Is that so? One needs to take note of the difference in environment when hiding oneself. Emlyn muttered silently to himself, feeling as though he had learned a new trick. He didn't plan on heading to East Borough immediately. This was because even if he took action in the day, it would be very difficult to escape without causing a commotion. It was a rather dangerous act in Backland, as it meant that the mandated punishers or nighthawks might come knocking at the door just after he sneaked back home. Emlyn planned on verifying the situation and taking action between 8 to 9 in the evening after the tarot gathering. The primordial moon believer from before was quite strong. These 2 likely aren't weaker. Although I have confidence, it feels unsafe only relying on myself. As Emlyn considered the problem, he waved his hand and bade Ian farewell. He rode on a rental carriage, heading back for the south side of the bridge. Eastchester County, Stone City. Audrey stood behind a railing, watching the servants placing the items that had been brought from the family castle in suitable spots. The scene was bustling but orderly. I'll send someone to associate Professor Michel later and tell him that I'll be paying a visit to the Relics Search and Preservation Foundation. I hope that they've obtained some items that have been tainted with beyonder effects. As Audrey's mind wandered, she couldn't help but smile. She was proud of her decision of donating the funds to establish the foundation. When her eyes that were as beautiful as emeralds saw the time on the wall clock, she hurriedly reined in her thoughts and turned to return to her bedroom. Susie was slumped in a corner of the bedroom. Its front paws were crossed, giving it a sense of elegance. In front of it was an open book. There were dense lines of text written on it. Susie would raise one of her front paws from time to time to flip the page, as she read with great seriousness. Every time I see Susie like that, I feel a little ashamed. Audrey, you mustn't slack off on your education. Audrey encouraged herself in silence as she approached, planning to get Susie to head outside to guard the door. Susie looked up and glanced at Audrey before standing straight up, saying, "I got it." After saying that, it briskly ran out the bedroom without closing the door. "I haven't said anything." Audrey blinked as she softly muttered to herself. She had given such instructions many times, to prevent Susie from detecting that she wanted to be alone in the room from 3 to 3:30 p.m. On Mondays, forbidding humans and dogs from coming close. She had also done similar matters at other times, pretending that there was a gathering, wanting alone time while maintaining an irregular pattern. I have to say that Susie's existence has effectively raised my motivation to learn, as well as how strictly I handle matters. I can't be inferior to a dog, but being better than this dog doesn't seem to be something worthy of praise. Audrey puffed her cheeks with a self-deprecating comment as she sat by her bed, awaiting the beginning of the tarot gathering. 3 p.m., above the gray fog. Dark red figures shot up along the two sides of the long bronze table, materializing into different blurry figures. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool," Audrey's greeted with a cheery voice as she bowed. The other members greeted one after another, until the existence at the seat of honor nodded in response. While sitting down, Furs couldn't help but look at Mr. World, wondering what she should use as an opening. Apart from passing on her teacher's reply to Ma'am Hermit, she planned on doing a few matters. 1. She wanted to tell Mr. World that due to the difficulty of the mission, she would pay him more, but it required him to wait. This was because the sale of the houses took time. 2nd, after brainstorming, she thought of a good way that could earn money and raise her strength. She had gained inspiration from the world's actions. Rent out Lamino's travels. When a member needed an item to temporarily raise their combat strength to deal with certain situations, they could rent Lamino's travels from her. The rent could be paid in two forms: cash, which wasn't too expensive, or to record beyond her powers instead. This also meant that the renter had to guarantee that the spellbook was returned with more filled pages. Of course, as the provider, Furs would record useful apprentice powers like door opening, providing the renter with relevant help. A problem that could easily happen in this transaction was that the renter might not return it. But with Mr. Fool witnessing these exchanges in the tarot club, Furs believed that no one would be blinded by greed. And the death of the renter was a low probability event for losing Lamino's travels. But with everyone knowing that they could pray to Mr. Fool in times of danger, death was an even smaller probability. How can there not be any risks when doing business? I will talk to Mr. World about when he will use it, so that there won't be any conflicts. Furs retracted her gaze and heard Ma'am Hermit speak. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have 2 pages of Roselle's diary this time. Ever since contact was made with Queen Mystic, the receiving of diary pages has stabilized in a rather terrifying manner." Klein nodded slightly and chuckled. "Very good." After a brief silence, Catlia conjured 2 yellowish-brown pieces of paper. They leaped into Mr. Fool's palms, as if they had tunneled through the spirit world. Klein slowly lowered his gaze at the diary in his hands. December 29th. It's almost a new year again. All the mausoleums have been built. What's done cannot be undone. Chapter 790. The end of the diary. All the mausoleums have been built. What's done cannot be undone. Klein looked at the diary page in his hand, as his thoughts boiled over as ideas kept emerging and shattering. From his point of view, this diary page of Emperor Roselle nearly proved his previous conjectures. He had chosen to forcefully switch to the Black Emperor pathway in his later years, doing so at the cost of going mad to become a Sequence Zero true god. What drove the Emperor to make such a decision? What did he discover that resulted in his agitation, rashness, and loss of composure in the previous diary entry? And compared to back then, his emotions in this diary entry appear calm and composed, but it feels like he is even more extreme. It's hard to imagine what the Emperor experienced or encountered in his later years that resulted in him having such an abnormal situation. The madness that angels are embroiled with to begin with Or is it something that had happened to the faith of the believers that kept him anchored, his rationality? If he was normal, shouldn't he hold back a little and strive for certain outcomes before finding an opportunity to devour the hidden sage? Klein instantly thought of many things, but he was unable to find any evidence. And on this page of goatskin, there were only 2 short lines of text, as though it indicated the final diary page of Emperor Rosel's life. The end of the year or the beginning of the new year was the day he was suspected to have perished in the White Maple Palace. An emperor of an era, a transmigrator's last words? Klein sighed silently as he flipped to the goatskin beneath. The diary page didn't have a date, but at the top of the page was a line in Faceac. Immediately follows the previous page. The words were written neatly and elegantly, very different from Emperor Rosel's handwriting. It was obvious that it was added by someone else. It's probably a note by Queen Mystic, to indicate that this is the last part of the diary, written after the emperor said that what's done cannot be undone. But why isn't there a date? Klein was deeply puzzled as he read the corresponding content, his gaze freezing up. I believe I'm not the only transmigrator in this world. If there's anyone else who can read my diary, remember to carefully select your Beyonder pathway. Once you choose this, it pretty much confirms your allies and your enemies. I'm unable to give any actual suggestions, because I myself can't see the true faces of the 7 deities, or those evil gods. This might be partially related to the second blasphemy slate that the ancient organization hides. Unfortunately, I only have a rough idea of the hidden parts, and I'm unable to verify them. Similarly, I don't know what's written on the first blasphemy slate either. A useful warning is to not choose pathways with sequence zeros that are occupied, and also be careful of neighboring sequence zeros and sequence ones. I've suffered tremendously on this aspect. As for what sequence 0 represents, search for my other diary pages if you aren't aware. Haha, this page is equivalent to the afterword of my life. If I succeed, I'll be a god, and it will be another story. If I were to fail, there wouldn't be a future. Perhaps, well, you know. Go, my friend who understands my diary. Go seek out the secret of transmigration, and the truth hidden within. I'll be watching you, if I'm still alive. Finally, let me warn you that you have to remember. Be careful of the moon. Klein wasn't surprised about there being more than one transmigrator. After all, he had long known of a senior, in the form of Emperor Rosel. He was puzzled about the details that the emperor had used to determine that there wasn't only one transmigrator. This was a very important point, as it held great meaning, as to whether there were incomparable problems in his bid to return home. This was like an unknown equation. Without enough examples and conditions, there was no way to obtain the correct answer, no matter how he tried to solve it. Only with enough equations could he find the correct answer. The emperor should have written his discoveries on this matter in the previous diary entries. Unfortunately, I have no way of knowing where it is in order to do a targeted search and recovery. Klein silently sighed before considering the other contents in the afterword. The hidden contents in the second blasphemy slate, which the Twilight Hermit Order showed? Did they deliberately hide the contents? Or did they not actually obtain it? The second blasphemy slate was actually split into 2 parts, with the other half landing in the hands of other factions? My pathway has already been determined. It was selected based on the exclamation found in Emperor Rosel's diary. From the Emperor's afterword, I can be a bit assured. The seer pathway doesn't have a sequence 0, because the mad sequence 1 Zeradol is still alive. And according to the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation, this subdivision part can probably be called the law of incompatibility. If there's a sequence 1, there's no sequence 0. I need to be careful of Zeradol, Mr. Door, Blasphemer Amon, and Pallas Zoroast, as well as the other sequence 1s who exist in these 3 pathways. What does being careful of the moon mean? Be careful of the primordial moon? That could be said directly. Wait, the Emperor apparently had thoughts of exploring the Crimson Moon before. Could it be that he finally committed himself to do it, and discovered something on the moon? Which is why he warned other transmigrators to be careful of the moon. The moon has something to do with transmigration? Yes, The Emperor's tone indicates that he still has some contingency plans, and he might not completely perish. He might be watching me. There should also be clues to such matters, and they should also be written in the earlier diary entries. As conclusions and puzzlements flashed through Klein's mind, he finally turned solemn. He made the diary in his hand vanish and looked towards Katlia. Do you have anything you want to ask? Katlia nudged the heavy glasses on her nose and politely bowed her head. Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to know if Emperor Roselle is still alive. This question snapped the other members of the Tarot Club out of their own thoughts, as they looked towards the end of the bronze table in agitation. Although Emperor Roselle being alive wasn't directly related to them, nor would it bring any obvious influence, this topic was enough to stir the thirst hidden deep in the hearts of people regarding rumors and gossip. I thought I would be immune to such matters after advancing to a psychiatrist. Sigh, I'm really curious. Audrey looked at Mr. Fool with bright eyes as she waited for him to give the answer. Only Derek was uninterested in the matter. The reason why he looked at Mr. Fool was solely because everyone else had done so. Indeed, Queen Mystic's questions are basically targeted at the diary pages she provides. Klein didn't feel stumped as he skillfully chuckled. Perhaps. By using the answer perhaps, he was expressing that Emperor Roselle had the hope of saving himself. As for whether he eventually succeeded, or whether there was an accident, it wasn't in the scope of the question that might not have an answer. Perhaps. Mr. Fool is implying that Emperor Roselle might still be alive? Katlia and company felt as though they had heard the greatest secret in the world, as they felt a little agitated and excited. However, they could also sense the underlying tone in Mr. Fool's words. Due to the lack of diary entries, and with him having just awoken recently, he was unable to determine if Emperor Roselle had seized an opportunity. To determine that would require more clues and evidence in the future. Regardless, Emperor Roselle was likely mentally prepared for the assassination. Without giving Justice, the Hanged Man, and company to think of the related problems, Klein leaned back and said with a calm tone, "That's all from me." Furs hurriedly snapped out of her fantasizing of Roselle's late years, as she looked to the end of the bronze table. Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to communicate privately with the world. It will end quickly. What does she want to communicate with Gehrman Sparrow about? Isn't Mr. X's matter over? Klein thought in puzzlement as he nodded gently. Yes. Following that, he blocked the senses of the other members and controlled the world to chuckle hoarsely. Is there anything else? Furs deliberated for 2 seconds and said, This is the matter. Mr. X's head allowed me to receive a handsome reward. I believe that I didn't pay enough on this matter to match the difficulty of the mission. Therefore, I wish to compensate you. How much do you wish to receive? Not bad. You actually want to compensate me without any prompting. Although Miss Magician is a little greedy on gaining petty advantages, she's still an honest person. It's very normal to earn some profit while making a transaction. It's not considered greedy. The pleasantly surprised Klein sighed inwardly in praise as he made the world chuckle. How much can you pay? Furs hesitated for a moment and said, £5,000. She had used the £10,000 price she had informed her teacher, and planned to split it evenly with Mr. World. Furthermore, she needed the recipe, crystal ball, and beyonder ingredient. Thus, she planned on selling the 2 properties and give him money directly. And as for the reason why Furs was this generous, it had to do with the mission being harder than she had expected, while also paying too low a price. In addition, she was increasingly fearful of the world Gehrman Sparrow. She didn't dare to offend the crazy adventurer and terrifying bounty hunter. The Abraham family gave quite a huge reward. Klein controlled the world to say with a laugh, If you can use large amounts of gold coins in place of notes, you can pay less. It will just depend on how much you can gather. I'll try my best. Although Furs was very puzzled over why Mr. World valued gold coins that much, she didn't dare to ask. He had done the same with Ma'am Hermit's transaction previously. She paused before asking, Mr. World, when would you need to use Lamino's travels? I plan on renting it out before and after that period, in order to earn some money and beyonder powers. Rent it out? Rent out a mystical item? Klein was taken aback upon hearing that. He never expected Miss Magician to have such business-oriented mind. Chapter 791. New model as a youth that came from the internet age on Earth. Klein quickly understood Miss Magician's idea, how she prepared to do it, and what she was relying on. Isn't this sharing economy? With the Tarot Club and the Fool, there's no technological limitation. Miss Magician is usually lazy and doesn't have a strong presence, but I never expected her to have sharp acumen on such matters. It also stems from me requesting to borrow the spellbook. Regardless, to be able to quickly be inspired and set up a business model is pretty good. Klein deliberately made the world Gehrman Sparrow hesitate for a few seconds before saying, I might need it this weekend and next week. He was estimating this based on the time it took Mr. Hanged Man to return from the Abyss Maelstrom to the Rörsted Sea, while also allocating time for him to stabilize his spirituality and replenish his supplies. When the time came, they would join forces to explore the primitive island with many Beyonder creatures. Furs hurriedly nodded. All right, I will make the arrangements to prevent others from using it. As she heaved a sigh of relief, she requested Mr. Fool that he bear witness for the subsequent rental agreements. After obtaining a confirmation from him, she indicated that she was done with the private communication. Following that, she conjured Lamino's travels and surveyed the table. Everyone, I have here a mystical item. It has a total of 38 pages. Each page can help the user record Beyonder powers they encounter. They will then be able to release it when needed, but it will be slightly weaker than the original power. Each page can be repeatedly recorded. Each record can only be used once. Amongst them, 3 pages can be used to record demigod-level Beyonder powers, but the chances of success are very low. It might not succeed 1 in 10 times. First, simply explain the traits of Lamino's travels and its negative effects. It lit up the eyes of Audrey and company, with them no longer being novices in the domain of mysticism or the Beyonder world. It wasn't difficult for them to tell the value of Miss Magician's notebook without her making it explicit to them. At the same time, they viewed it as a demigod-level artifact. It resembles a shepherd and the creeping hunger. They allow the use of the Beyonder powers from other pathways, but there aren't as many negative effects. There's also a chance to record a demigod power. Draw my own blood. Audrey suddenly shrank her hand back in fear as she thought over the matter. As a powerful noble's daughter, she had almost never been injured from a young age. Therefore, she had an extreme fear of pain that remained an unknown to her. Taking the opportunity when Furs paused, she raised her hand slightly and asked, Miss Magician, how much do you wish to sell it for? Audrey believed that her father, Earl Hall, would also be able to recognize the value of Lamino's travels, so it was certain that she could be reimbursed by him. Therefore, she planned on fully satisfying Furs's requirements. She must be lacking money recently, or else she wouldn't be selling such an important and useful mystical item. While Audrey thought in pity, she considered whether she should offer to buy it at a premium. Damn it! Why can't it be put on sale after I return from the primitive island? Alger had a strong interest in Lamino's travels, but he wasn't able to produce the money or materials needed to purchase this mystical item. £1,300 was money that an ordinary person might not be able to save up even in 10 to 20 years, but compared to an item at the level of Lamino's travels, it was nothing. It's worth at least £10,000. If I encounter Beyonders that are backed by powerful factions, it wouldn't be a problem selling it for more than £30,000. Alger swept his glance at Justice, who was inquiring about the price, as well as Catlia, who had nudged her glasses, looking as though she was planning to join the bid. He couldn't help but sigh. He didn't believe that the transaction would fail according to his wishes, having it left unsold before he returned from the primitive island. Miss Justice has money, and the Hermit has Queen Mystic and the Moses Ascetic Order. They don't lack money or resources. Sigh. Alger adjusted his seating posture as he looked across the table with a heavy look. Emlyn and Derek were similarly interested in Lamino's travels, but it was simply interest. They knew that they lacked the ability to provide anything in a fair exchange. When she heard Miss Justice's question, Furs realized that she had forgotten to mention the most crucial point. She hurriedly added, "No, it's not for purchase. I'm only renting it. When you need it, you can rent it for a short period, which will be witnessed by Mr. Fool." Rent. You can do that. At that moment, everyone except Klein and Derek were surprised. Without a doubt, they knew what a rental transaction was, but they never expected it to be applied to a mystical item, much less have it appear in the Tarot Club. This was apparently very doable. It was relatively useful for every member of the Tarot Club, and it wouldn't cost them much while remaining affordable. Furthermore, Miss Magician could slowly build up quite a sizable fortune by doing so. But in fact, the best result was to record beyond her powers. She could gather different kinds of beyond her powers from various pathways in this way, making it far more efficient than seeking the chance to record it on her own. Alger quickly realized the key to the rental transaction, as he was delighted. He asked, "How much is the rental fee?" Laymanos Travels corresponds to a sequence 6. It's usually about £5,000, but due to its uniqueness, it costs at least £10,000. Furs had built up quite a bit of experience during her time in the Tarot Club, so after some consideration she said, "Each rental basically starts at £300. Every additional day is an additional £50. And when returning it, the notebook needs to have 2 additional pages of beyond her powers than when it was rented out. If there's only 1 blank page, or no blank pages when it's rented, one just needs to fill up the full book." Having 2 additional pages didn't mean 2 additional powers. That also meant that they could use any of the beyond her powers in Laymanos Travels. One just needed to make up for it later. There was no need for it to be of the same type, as pages were all that mattered. £50 a day, £1,500 a month. If it's possible, I can keep renting it. Audrey did a simple count of the costs. Alger was thrilled when he heard that, as he said with an unperturbed look, "I plan on renting it for 2 days, but the exact price needs negotiation. It will be adjusted based on what beyond her powers are recorded in the notebook." He felt more confident towards his exploration of the primitive island. "When do you plan to rent it?" Furs asked, delighted that she had business right away. "I'll be renting it for 2 days sometime, between this weekend to next weekend. The exact time hasn't been determined," Alger replied without any hesitation. Furs immediately frowned as she said apprehensively, "This period of time has already been reserved for Mr. World." "Reserved for the world? When did this happen?" Alger was surprised as he looked at the other end of the long bronze tail. He soon came to a realization that it had been agreed upon during their private communication. Why would they come to such an agreement? Miss Magician doesn't need to have informed him ahead of time. They had other transactions during the private communication? What kind of communications and transactions would they have? Miss Magician had commissioned the assassination of an Aurora Order Oracle. The world had accepted the mission, and one of the traits of the Oracle is the ability to record and use the beyond her powers of others once. Haha, this is identical to Laymanos Travels. Does this mean that the world has already succeeded? As such, Miss Magician is indebted to him, and she hadn't fully resolved it. Now, she came up with this method to pay off the rest? Alger eliminated the possibilities, and finally felt that he had found the truth. Without anyone catching wind of it, the world Gehrman Sparrow had already hunted an Aurora Order Oracle, an oracle suspected to be a Sequence 5. This secretly made Alger feel alarmed, because he was about to cooperate with the world soon. Thankfully, there's Mr. Fool bearing witness. As a blessed, Gehrman Sparrow wouldn't violate the agreement he makes in front of a god. Alger consoled himself, and retracted his gaze from the world. Meanwhile, Audrey and Katlia had recalled the matter of the Aurora Order Oracle from the transactions involving both Miss Magician and Mr. World, as well as how the Oracle's powers were similar to Laymanos Travels. Hence, they believed that the world might have already completed the mission. Renting the spellbook was one of the parts to completing the transaction. Emlyn didn't think about such matters, putting his focus on the unavailability of Laymanos Travels this weekend and the following week. In other words, I can borrow it for the next few days? If I have help from this notebook, those two primitive believers wouldn't be able to pose a threat. Emlyn looked around and turned anxious as he leisurely said, "Can I rent it for today and tomorrow?" £400 plus 2 pages of Beyond Our Powers. Furs directly announced the price. Emlyn nodded gently. Introduce what Beyond Our Powers are recorded first. If they aren't very useful to me, I wish that the price can be lowered, because I'll need to waste time recording powers. Furs flipped through Laymanos Travels and began to give a vague introduction. Door opening, black screen, tumble, teleport, lightning strike, float, flight, wind blades. And why are there so many Beyond Our Powers in the storm domain? The world has used it before? He recorded the Beyond Our Powers corresponding to See God from Mr. Fool. When I return to the cathedral, I should find out what recently happened in Backlund. That oracle couldn't have died without a trace. As Alger listened, he began thinking of investigating the matter. Chapter 792. The Fool's Authority. The hermit similarly thought of the world Gehrman Sparrow, from hearing the Beyond Our Powers, which were recorded in Laymanos Travels. I wonder if I can pay a certain price to get the Fool to showcase demigod powers of the storm pathway, as well as his domain. This will be better than seeking the help of the Moses Ascetic Order. That will make them know of my possession of Laymanos Travels. I should first write to Her Majesty. Perhaps she will come to the future to showcase her powers. Katlia was increasingly convinced that the spellbook had a value that exceeded its level, and was very regretful that Miss Magician was only renting it. After hearing the description, Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief. This was because the Beyond Our Powers, like lightning, were very lethal against artificial vampires. Of course, it was the same for Sanguine. Very good. I was still worried about needing to seek the sun's help and passing Laymanos Travels to him, to get him to showcase purification powers to be recorded. Emlyn instantly became relaxed as he glanced at Derek beside him while saying to Furs, "Deal." £400 with the recording of a few Beyond Our Powers was nothing compared to the completion of his mission. I can earn money quickly, and also obtain Beyond Our Powers this way. Furs suddenly felt that her future was bright, as she hurriedly smiled. "All right, I'll get Mr. Fool to transfer it to you after the gathering." Right on the heels of that, she turned to say to Katlia, "Ma'am, the Abraham family's direct descendant has given a reply. Do you wish to communicate privately, or have me directly say it out loud?" Katlia thought and said, "Let's do it privately." Soon, the others had their senses blocked as Furs recounted what her teacher said. They don't know much about Mr. Door either. They only know 2 things, no 3. First, among their ancestors, there is an existence known as Mr. Door. Second, this ancestor vanished in the War of the 4 Emperors. They've been struggling to find him. Third, they will hear ravings that can cause a loss of control during the full moon and blood moon. In addition, they temporarily do not wish to make any direct contact. The third point was added by Furs by herself. She wished that Ma'am Hermit and the Queen Mystic behind her could use this to further understand Mr. Door's matters. This was beneficial in helping the Abraham escape the fate of being cursed. Mr. Door is the Abraham family's ancestor, and he vanished in the War of the 4 Emperors. He would create ravings during full moons? The latter was confirmed by Mr. Fool, so there's nothing suspicious. That is to say that although Mr. Door has vanished, he still can affect Beyonders of the same bloodline, as well as living beings that use certain items during the full moon and blood moon. This means that he hasn't completely lost his connection with the real world. This is how the Emperor was able to interact with him. Her Majesty once said that there were members of the Abraham family who worked for the Emperor back then. Katlia had some theories as she gently nodded. "If there are any questions, I'll get you to pass them on. I'll pay the remaining £650 today." With £650, along with Mr. Moon's £400, I've made a profit of £1,050 today, together with the £730 from before, as well as the sale of the 2 properties to pay Mr. World. I might still have £1,000 left. My savings are about to exceed £3,000. This way, I'll have the money needed to purchase the other main ingredient for scribe. I might still have some left over. At that moment, Fur suddenly found herself a little wealthy. This made her consider helping purchase the interrogator beyonder characteristic for Zio. To make up for the risk, she had to endure over Mr. X's assassination. After the blocking of senses was lifted, Furs heard the world Gehrman Sparrow speak, before she could say a word. I need a mystical item from the Marauder pathway. It can be at sequence 9 or 8. Catlia considered for a moment and said, I can ask around for you. However, items of the Marauder pathway aren't common. There might be a premium involved. No problem. Klein controlled the world to provide the response. He then made his marionette look at the now wealthy Miss Magician. I want to sell an interrogator beyonder characteristic for only £1,000. Typically, this sequence 7 beyonder characteristic, which could be used as a main ingredient, should have been priced around £1,200, but Klein had 2 sets at the moment. Furthermore, considering how he had used Miss Zio's identity to participate in Mr. X's gathering, there was a certain degree of danger he was bringing to her. Therefore, he gave a slight discount. It's only £1,000. That's like a sale at a department store. But why does Mr. World know that I want it? He is Mr. Fool's blessed. The interrogator beyonder characteristic was in his hands. And he is also aware that I can now afford it. Furs was stunned for 2 seconds, as she nearly forgot to reply. During this process, Audrey held back the urge to engage in shopping, because she knew that Zio needed the item. £1,000? An interrogator's beyonder characteristic? Catlia seriously thought over the hidden intent behind the world when she heard Miss Magician say, Deal. I haven't even made my offer. Catlia mumbled inwardly as she maintained her silence. She could tell that the world and the magician had reached a strange level of understanding on this matter, so she didn't interject. Similarly, she also sensed that something good had happened to the hanged man this week. He appeared more spirited than before, appearing more confident. He previously purchased the potion formula and main ingredients to Ocean Songster. He had also asked me where obninsks that do not belong to the Church of Storms can be found. This is likely related to the ritual. He has already advanced. Catlia suddenly felt a sense of danger. As the Admiral of Stars who was famous throughout the 5 seas, she always felt a sense of superiority in the Tarot Club. But in recent times, with the world Gehrman Sparrow showing his ability at hunting pirate admirals, followed by the hanged man reaching sequence 5, a sequence 5 that made him adept at sea battles, she felt that she no longer had the right to belittle others. She felt a sense of urgency that hadn't existed in her for a long time. However, I have sequence 4 ahead of me. It's the boundary between spirituality and godhood. It's not that easy to advance. I still don't see any hope despite preparing for years. Catlia sighed inwardly as she looked at the world Gehrman Sparrow and asked, Any chances for the blood of a mythical creature? I've been waiting for you to ask this. The fool Klein smiled while watching the transactions as he controlled the world to hoarsely laugh. That angel got me to ask you what you can give him in exchange for a drop of blood. He emphasizes that it needs to satisfy him. Angel? Mr. World directly contacted an angel? Furthermore, he has convinced the angel to provide a drop of blood. Audrey was first alarmed before her thoughts raced, as she turned to look at the seat of honor. She suspected that the world Mr. Fool's blessed had contacted an angel that was in service to Mr. Fool. She was like the magician, believing that the world only knew of clues to the location of an angel or its remains. They never expected him to directly converse with an angel. One had to know that the grounded angels were equivalent to the leaders of the 7 churches. Indeed, Alger sighed silently, believing that his guess has been verified. As expected of Mr. Fool's blessed, Catlia held back her surprise and shock as she pondered. May I know what pathway this angel is from? The world surveyed the area and said, Monster. Monster, which means it's an angel from the fate pathway. It's no wonder Mr. Fool's honorific name has the words King of Yellow and Black who wields good luck. Audrey, Derek, and company were enlightened, believing that their inferences matched the actual situation and the inherent logic. Their gazes and guesses stirred Klein. He realized a corresponding problem. In the honorific name he fabricated, the description of wielding good luck had successfully been directed towards the mysterious space above the gray fog. Is this related to why the people from the fate pathway can see my uniqueness? Could this be related to why the Snake of Mercury, Will Septon, took the initiative to establish friendly ties with me? In my honorific name's 3 lines, the first line is a description of my inherent self, and the second is about the corresponding divine domain. Only the third line involves the authority, wields good luck. Of course, the Fool itself can also contain a certain amount of authority. Klein suddenly felt that he needed to find an opportunity to communicate with the unborn fetus. However, he suspected that the paper crane would tear at any moment. This was because just erasing the original content was already a rather precarious process. At this moment, Catlia said, "Thanks for your help. I will seriously consider it and give you a response as soon as possible." She planned on consulting Queen Mystic to see if there were any conditions that would entice an angel from the fate pathway. With the conversation between the world and the hermit ending, the transactions came to a formal end. The tarot gathering then proceeded into a period for free communication. Furs thought for a moment and looked at Emlyn. "I'd like to remind you of 2 things. First, be familiar with the powers on each corresponding page. It will be very dangerous if you were to flip to the wrong page and use the wrong power in combat." Emlyn scoffed immediately as he said, "I'm very confident in my intelligence." Furs didn't speak further and switched to mentioning, "A serious case involving Beyonders happened in East Borough. The surrounding region is on high alert. If you plan on carrying out any operations, take note of that." Emlyn viewed this piece of information with great importance as he asked, "Are you aware of what happened?" Chapter 793. Surprise visitor. Upon hearing Mr. Moon's question, Furs nearly blurted out, "Of course. Better than anyone else. I'm just not too aware of the details." However, she controlled her mouth in time as she apprehensively looked at Mr. World. At the same time, Alger, Audrey and Catlia vaguely guessed that the serious matter that had happened in Backlund's East Borough was the assassination of the Aurora Order's Oracle. Based on the inferences they had before, it was done by the World. And as Emlyn wasn't a spectator, he wasn't able to tell from her eyes. All Furs could do was force a smile at Emlyn. "I'm unable to tell you the specifics. I only know that demigod-level Beyonder powers of the Storm domain appeared back then. The Church of Storms places a great deal of attention over the matter." She didn't dare divulge the reasons on behalf of Mr. World, simply describing what she had seen. She believed that if Mr. World was willing to reveal more, he definitely would have added on to her answer. Demigod-level Beyonder powers of the Storm domain? Audrey and company were taken aback, as they instinctively doubted the accuracy of their theories. They had previously imagined that Laminos travels had been created after the death of the Aurora Order Oracle. Therefore, the World had no way of borrowing Mr. Fool's demigod-level powers to record them before the assassination. The serious case involving Beyonders in East Borough has nothing to do with Mr. World? No, Furz's glance is enough proof that it was caused by Mr. World. But why would a demigod-level Beyonder power of the Storm domain appear? One possibility is that Laminos travels isn't a result of this assassination, but that it originally belonged to Furs. Another possibility is that a cardinal of the Church of Storms, or a Beyonder with the corresponding sealed artifact, had delivered an attack. If it were the former, needing Mr. World to use the Beyonder powers at the demigod level implies that the Oracle was relatively powerful, with the possible existence of a saint backing him. If it were the latter, to have Mr. World still be able to leave safely after such an assault implies his formidableness. Of course, the possibility can't be eliminated that he deliberately lured the Church of Storms to encounter the Aurora Order's Oracle, and while a battle broke out between demigods, he efficiently carried out an assassination during the chaos. Audrey made some guesses based on the details she had observed, and each guess implied one thing. The World had the strength, intelligence, support, and ability, making him one of the top sequence 5 Beyonders below that of demigods. How terrifying. As expected of Mr. Fool's blessed. When I arrive at a cathedral, I should be able to figure out what happened. Alger also made a basic judgment of the situation as he sighed. All he could do was console himself. With such a helper, the exploration of the primitive island would only be easier. As for Katlia, she shared similar thoughts with Audrey. She planned on asking Queen Mystic about the situation. This owner of the Dawn had previously revealed in her letter that she would be in Backland for the time being. Demigod level beyond her powers of the Storm Domain. Emlyn repeated Miss Magician's words as his head ached. Although he enjoyed staying at home and not heading out, he still needed to head out to get some blood to drink from the hospitals. Being in a big city, he was equipped with common knowledge. Together with his elders' warnings and guidance, he knew a lot about the official organizations like the Machinery Hive Mind, mandated Punishers, and Nighthawks. He knew the influence that a serious case would bring to the area. If I don't have a good disguise while infiltrating East Borough, I might be caught by the mandated Punishers before I even approach my targets. Although I have the identity of being part of the Church of Mother Earth, and wouldn't be impounded underground or made into a test subject of sealed artifacts, this also means that my operation has failed. I might even have Lamino's travels taken away. During such times, taking the sewers would be even more dangerous. Who knows how many official Beyonders are lying in ambush over there? Emlyn suddenly felt that what seemed like a simple mission had turned difficult. He quickly came to a decision that he would take action in the latter half of the night. During this time, the low-class residents of East Borough would begin returning home from work. Although it was dark, the streets would be bustling. Even if the mandated Punishers had 10 times more manpower, it was impossible to carry out any strict surveillance and single out every possible suspect. The next important step is to plan the operation to finish off the 2 artificial vampires without causing much of a stir. I'll have to consider a situation of an intense battle that's impossible to hide. Wait, Miss Magician had just mentioned that Lamino's Travels has a beyonder power known as teleport. The problem is resolved. Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief and chuckled. I will keep that in mind. He had said that sentence very calmly and with great confidence, as though everything was in control. This fellow Emlyn was first stumped before feeling relieved. There's a 90% chance, he recalled the Traveler's Door in Lamino's Travels. If I hadn't obtained traveling, I definitely would have added the condition that no one is to touch that spellbook's page before the world Gairman Sparrow. Klein scoffed silently without a word. To him, as there was only one Traveler's Door in Lamino's Travels, he definitely needed to use Creeping Hunger for his return trip to the primitive island. In that case, he might as well exploit the glove, as he needed to feed a death row convict to it. He didn't want to waste it. Anyways, I've warned you. Furs didn't speak further, wishing that everything would go smoothly for Mr. Moon. At that moment, Alger turned to look at Little Sunday. Are you still in the City of Silver? Yes, my recent mission is to acquaint myself with my powers and patrol the surrounding area, Derek replied honestly. Alger thought for a moment before saying, Has that Shepherd Elder not looked for you recently? No. Derek paused. The 6-member council seems to be busy with the former chief's mausoleum. As for what it is, I'm not privy to the information. Klein had heard Little Sun mention of the former chief of the City of Silver. It was said that he had built a mausoleum that reached deep underground before moving into it, and he hadn't appeared again. It was suspected that his attempt to switch to Sequence 3 of the Death Pathway had failed. I wonder what happened inside the mausoleum. My spiritual intuition tells me that there's danger involved. Before Klein spoke, he heard Alger say, Take note of this matter. To investigate the former chief's mausoleum at such a critical moment means that it's something important. It might bring you danger. Okay. Derek nodded strongly. I'll do my best to figure out the specifics. The exchange continued. As the members didn't encounter much this week, this segment quickly came to an end. The Tarot Club members began teaching the Sun mysticism languages of the outside world, as they learned about ancient myths from him. During this process, Audrey was a little disappointed and depressed. She had failed to buy anything or share anything this week, and her participation appeared lacking. Sigh. My life has been too quiet and stable. I have nothing to share. However, this is normal. As the daughter of one of the top 3 bankers in the kingdom, a daughter of Eastchester's Earl, if I were to frequently encounter beyonder matters, experiencing alarming and exciting matters every week, that means that the present society and government structure is unable to maintain the order of the beyonder world. It would definitely result in a fundamental change to everything. When I return to Backlund, my contact with the psychology alchemists will increase. I'll be able to change this situation. Audrey rapidly became optimistic, and she stood up and bade Mr. Fool farewell. Over the past half a year, she had read quite a number of useful books thanks to Susie. In terms of profundity and maturity, she was a lot better than before. Backlund Street, Northborough, 160 Backlund Street. After ending the tarot club, Klein walked to the attached balcony to his bedroom, and he looked at the surrounding environment, which was filled with vegetation. With Miss Magician's attempt to rent out Lamino's travels, there will be more of such tarot club transactions in the future. Haha, they might not have realized that their own beyonder powers can be sold. Once the rentals happen more frequently, someone will ultimately request someone to help record a particular power. When the time comes, I'll be able to supply beyonder powers of various domains, thanks to the numerous mystical items I have. It won't be too expensive, but it's long-lasting, and it will often be in demand. I wonder who will be the first to muster their courage to seek the Fool for help, hoping that a demigod power can be recorded. This needs to be a fair exchange, and a sufficient price needs to be paid. If no one dares take that step, afraid that it's blasphemous, I can let the world be an example. After all, Mr. Fool has shown his friendliness and casualness from the beginning. As long as no mistakes are made, similar transactions can be made. Having the precedent of punishing Ma'am Hermit, I don't believe anyone will belittle the Fool as a result. They would be honored, delighted, and fearful. Klein thought about the tarot club as his thoughts wandered, filled with anticipation towards the trade of beyonder powers in the future. At this moment, he heard knocking at the door. "Please enter." Dwayne Dantes with his gray sideburns turned around and said. The doorknob turned and the door opened. Butler Walter in his white gloves walked in and said respectfully, "Sir, Ma'am Mary from the National Atmospheric Pollution Council is here to visit you. Do you wish to meet her?" Mary Schott, the major shareholder of the coin company. The lady who got me to investigate her former husband's adultery? Why is she here? Don't tell me that Dwayne Dantes has caught her fancy. Klein was slightly puzzled as he nodded with a smile. "It's almost tea time. Let's have it a little earlier." "All right, I will invite Ma'am Mary to the activity room on the 2nd story." Walter easily understood his employer's intentions. Klein nodded slightly without saying anything else. With the help of his valet Richardson, he wore his coat and went down to the 2nd story. Soon, he saw Ma'am Mary with her tall cheekbones in the activity room. This lady was dressed in a dark blue dress with elegant accessories in an ostentatious but restrained manner. Compared to last year, she appeared more classy and with a higher temperament. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I've always been considering finding a time to visit you. I would wish to hear about your investigations on Backlund's atmospheric pollution." Klein took the initiative to speak politely. Mary replied with a smile. "Unfortunately, I didn't manage to wait for it." After exchanging a few words of pleasantries as they talked about the recent weather, Klein sat on a single-seater as he raised his porcelain teacup. "Ma'am, you seem to have something troubling you?" He could tell that Mary was hesitant and deliberating. Mary laughed as she sighed. "I've heard about your experience and wisdom. I believe that you're a gentleman with excellent foresight." "This is the thing. Are you interested in purchasing some of the coin company's shares?" "Why, ma'am, are you in trouble?" Klein asked in a staid manner. Mary shook her head. "Someone else is selling them." Chapter 794. Short-term investment someone else is selling? Klein ruminated over those words without immediately asking. After the servant placed the silver 3-layered tray down for high tea and left, he said with a smile, "Ma'am, why don't you purchase it yourself?" Even a blind person knows that loan will place more attention on environmental pollution in the future. Therefore, the coin company, that deal with anthracite and high-quality charcoal, definitely has a promising future. It being worth $500,000, or even £1 million wouldn't be a fantasy. Of course, the premise is that the company's management can keep up with the corresponding expansion. In such a situation, the acquisition of shares in the coin company is definitely a profitable business. If I were you, I'd take it for myself, no matter how much debt I get myself into. Mary used 2 fingers to pick a cucumber sandwich from the bottom silver tray, took a tiny nibble, and slowly chewed before swallowing it down. With this as a buffer, she finally organized her words. Ever since the law to fix atmospheric pollution was passed, the coin company has been rapidly developing. The faces of the shareholders have begun changing. As you know, people who have their sights on money will often have good business sense. And behind them, there are usually some powerful figures at play. If I weren't a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, and had used this to get to know quite a number of nobles and high-ranking government officials, I believe I wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure, and I would end up selling my shares at a relatively good price. I would then leave the stage with a considerably good profit. But even so, most of the shares will quickly concentrate, and I'll quickly lose my status as the highest shareholder, losing control over the company's direction. This is something I inherited from my father. I don't want it to become somebody else's toy. I wish for it to slowly develop into the biggest anthracite and high-quality supplier to Backland, or even all of the Lone Kingdom. Haha, it's not that I haven't tried other solutions. I've pledged my shares and sold my property, investing a large sum of my liquidity into it, absorbing 15% of the shares in secret, as well as requesting friends that I can trust to help. I've obtained a total of 10% of the shares, and together with the 20% I originally had, I hold 45% in total. The current situation is that a minor shareholder suddenly decided to liquidate his 3%, and my friends and I temporarily do not have the money to acquire it. This is a commercial war. This was a first for Klein, who was accustomed to dealing with beyonders. He found it fresh but also unfamiliar. He similarly reached out his hand and selected a sandwich which had high-quality turkey at the bottom of the 3-layered tray. As he ate, he contemplated for about 10 seconds and said, "The shares that you acquire later can also be pledged, right? There won't be enough time. The other party has already provided an offer, and the transaction can be closed at any time," Mary said as she finished the food in her hand. Klein leaned back into his sofa in a relaxed manner. "Why did you come to me?" Upon hearing the question, Mary heaved a slight sigh of relief. "First, you must have brought quite a sizable amount of money to Backland. You wouldn't need to raise funds through different means. Second, you just came to Backland, so you aren't deeply involved with the other party or in other aspects. This also means that I'm not afraid that you would violate the terms of the agreement. Even if you choose to align with them, you'll have to consider if it's worth violating the law. Third, although we've only met once, I believe you are a very dignified and knowledgeable gentleman. Your praise is leaving me a little embarrassed. However, it also means that my acting performance as Dwayne Dantes is effective. At the very least, everyone knows that he's a middle-aged gentleman with foresight and competence, with plenty of money that he has nowhere to invest. Considering the original £16,493 and Miss Magician's £6,000, as well as the £48 provided by Mr. X, I have a total of £22,991 and 5 gold coins. Even if I deduct the £5,987 I owe Miss Messenger, I'll be considered a true tycoon. Many people with assets worth £100,000 might not have that much liquidity." Klein couldn't help but do a count of his wealth as he asked with a smile, "Ma'am, what do you wish for me to do?" Mary sipped some tea and said eloquently, "Acquire the 3% shares. But before that, I'll sign 2 contracts with you. The first contract stipulates that I'll forcefully purchase the shares from you in 3 months and buy it at the highest price over this period of time. The corresponding tax will be shouldered by me. The second contract stipulates that we act in concert. In addition, I will make you a member of the board of directors for the coin company. You will enjoy the corresponding perks as you monitor the company's development. This will help you be integrated even better into high society. Sounds like a sure win. It's equivalent to me providing a loan, and Ma'am Mary will repay me with a certain amount of interest and social resources. And compared to a debt agreement, I'll be holding on to the shares of an excellent company. It's more secure. After all, we are considered strangers. Of course, that's under the premise that the coin company itself is all right. This is also why she's making me a director. Klein analyzed the conditions proposed by Ma'am Mary and slowly felt enticed by them. From his point of view, Dwayne Dantes needed some investments. Otherwise, he would appear suspicious. Then, selecting the kind of investment was a rather important problem, since it had to be considered that Dwayne Dantes might have to give up everything and leave Backland because of his operation's failure or success. When the time comes, there's a chance to take away the money, but I can forget about the shares. This kind of investment, one that allows me to quickly recoup my investment, meets my requirements. I might even earn quite a bit. Klein contemplated for a moment before warmly smiling. Helping a lady resolve problems is something that I need to do. Ma'am Mary immediately felt relieved. Just as she was about to say something, she heard Dwayne Dantes' attractive voice continue. However, I'm rather cautious in regards to any investments I make. I will hire a lawyer and an accounting team to investigate the coin company's situation. I'll try to reach a conclusion as quickly as possible, and if there aren't any problems, we can begin our cooperation. Aside from that, I will also do a divination. Klein silently added inwardly. Definitely. Ma'am Mary smiled and added, I'll bear the costs for such expenses. Klein didn't reject the offer as he nodded and said, How much would the 3% shares cost? The current valuation is £9,600, but the shareholder believes that the coin company has a promising future, so it can't be lower than £12,000. Mary gave him the exact details. Phew. Klein used a calm and relaxed manner to smile. That's still all right. Dwayne Dantes is indeed rich, Mary thought as she said, Dwayne, can I invite you to visit the coin company tomorrow? That's exactly what I wish for, Klein replied with a smile. At the same time, he couldn't help but think of something. His former landlord, Stellan Sammer's husband, was likely still a manager at coin company. Yet another familiar face, but it's not one for Dwayne Dantes. Klein felt wistful for some baffling reason. At 8 p.m., there were still crowds of people entering East Borough from the other streets. Fatigue obviously colored their faces, and this continued almost until 10. Emlyn White had changed into a grayish-blue worker's attire, wore a cap, and hid himself in the alley of the Backland Bridge area, while observing the poor that sauntered back and forth. Although he didn't have any experience in disguising himself, he had eyes and brains. Just a short observation was enough for him to discover the problems with his attire. The most important point was that, compared to the poor who had dirty and ragged clothes, the work attire he had bought in the afternoon was too new and clean, easily attracting the attention of others. Emlyn thought for a moment, returned to the dark alley, and reached out his fingers. Using what he had seen, he began tearing open the areas that were easily damaged. Then, he observed his surroundings as his facial muscles gradually distorted into a grimace. With a look of contempt, Emlyn came to the wall, closed his eyes, and began dabbing the dirt onto his clothes and pants. The smell of coal, the smell of rotting mud. Emlyn subconsciously extended his palm away from himself as he covered his mouth with his other hand. He nearly vomited. At this moment, he realized that having an extraordinary sense of smell wasn't necessarily a good thing. After a few minutes of excruciating torture, Emlyn finally finished his disguise. Even his handsome face was stained with coal. With this disguise, he hunched his back and slipped into the crowd, quickly entering East Borough without garnering any attention. As he walked, Emlyn realized a problem. He wasn't familiar with the roads at all. He had no idea where Limestone Street or Beluga Whale Street was in East Borough. while most of the street signs had already been damaged. An assassination attempt really is a troublesome matter, Emlyn mumbled as he began asking around for directions. After nearly an hour of hard work, he finally arrived at Limestone Street. The streets were narrow, with the buildings on both sides leaning close to each other. Even in the day it appeared dark. At night, it gave off a terrifying sense of creepiness and darkness. But to the sanguine, such an environment wasn't bad. The only problem was the dirt and messiness. After spraying a medicine that eliminated his scent, Emlyn walked into the condominium at Unit 6, went to the third story, and approached the public washroom with his nose pinched before standing outside the room of primordial moon believer Argos. Emlyn cocked his ears to listen for a while before he stopped pinching his nose in puzzlement. He nearly fainted from the stench wafting over from the washroom. It took him a great bit of effort to focus his gaze on the room. His sense of smell told him that there wasn't anyone inside, nor were there any corpses. He moved away. Or he isn't back, Emlyn muttered silently in a daze. He never expected his hunt to be so unsuccessful. After reining in his emotions, Emlyn left the condominium and rushed to 19 Beluga Whale Street. This time, he was delighted to discover that someone was home. Gallus Kevin was home. At that moment, Emlyn caught the scent of another person. It was very identical to Argos's apartment at Limestone Street. Two people. There are two people in the room. Argos isn't home, because he came to Gallus Kevin. 2. Emlyn's expression suddenly froze. He wasn't worried if it was one-on-one, but if it was 1 against 2, he was still a little fearful with Lamino's travels. After all, the two of them were artificial vampires with rather significant strength. Chapter 795. Patience as a sanguine who liked to stay home. The number of battles Emlyn had involved himself in could be counted on one hand. Furthermore, he had never attempted fighting in the state of a numbers disadvantage, be it his attack on the previous primordial moon believer, or resisting Bishop Utrovsky from the Harvest Church. He basically had the numerical advantage in being the worst at one-on-one fights. Thinking back to the failure of his family of 3 attempting to defeat the half-giant bishop, Emlyn's expression turned livid, as though he had recalled the torture he suffered back at the Harvest Church. As there weren't many residents living here, and with Gallus Kevin having sharp senses as an artificial vampire, he didn't dare stay outside the door for too long. He quickly walked past the area, and walked to the end of the corridor, and hid in the shadows. What should I do next? Emlyn leaned against random objects that blocked the crimson sunlight, as his thoughts rapidly whirled in an attempt to find a solution with his pitiful amounts of experience. Gradually, the words which the hanged man had taught the sun surfaced in his mind. Patience is an important premise when dealing with many situations. Only by being able to curb your urges and irascibility will you be able to avoid danger to the greatest extent. At times, tolerance is very important. Tolerance. Emlyn nodded indiscernibly and knew what he needed to do. He planned on laying an ambush until Argos left. As this wasn't the artificial vampire's residence, it was certain that he would leave. When the time came, Emlyn could deal with a one-on-one situation. Patience, tolerance, waiting. Emlyn repeated these words inwardly, so as to resist the damage the surroundings were dealing to him. The air wafting through the first floor of the condominium was filled with the stench of piss, rotting moisture, the unflushed smell of feces, the odor of some of its residents, as well as all kinds of nauseating, unpleasant, and disgusting smells. Mixed together, they were like a poison that ate at Emlyn's senses. For the first time in his life, Emlyn wished that he could slice off his nose. He had the feeling as though he was stuck in an abyss, or was in hell suffering torture. Patience, tolerance, waiting. He mechanically chanted the principles, finding each second that passed excruciatingly long. Finally, he saw Gallus Kevin's door open. A thin dark brown figure walked out. His cheekbones protruded, and he had a high, sharp, and crooked nose. He was none other than the primordial moon believer Argos. At that moment, his face had patches of swollen festering that looked disgusting. Indeed, as that young boss Ian said, these fellows wear clothes that are clean and tidy, completely unlike the residents of East Borough. Emlyn became spirited as he watched Argos leave the condominium. After patiently waiting for nearly 5 minutes, he stood up and decided to take action. As his target, Gallus Kevin, was an artificial vampire, Emlyn was rather aware of his opponent's strengths and traits. Hence, he had made preparations in a targeted manner. Gallus Kevin's sense of smell isn't weaker than mine. When I just came of age. This actually cannot be confirmed. For him to stay in such an environment, he might have already lost his nose and brains. Besides, his spirituality can't be weak, and he has an innate instinct that's geared towards danger. His vision and hearing can't be too bad either. As Emlyn viewed his opponent with scorn, he consumed a potion and sprayed out a liquid to cover his body's scent again. Right on the heels of that, by consuming the potion and spraying it on like last time, he hit his body and attire, disappearing as though he had been wiped away by an eraser. In a dark, uninhabited corner, a palm-sized notebook which was bronze-green in color had suddenly appeared out of thin air, as though it had passed through a transparent screen. It began flipping itself almost silently before fixing onto a white page that was filled with astromancy symbols. As these symbols vanished, the surroundings brightened up a little. This was the disruption ability of an astrologer. Then, Lamino's travels was retracted, disappearing inch by inch as it was completely concealed by the invisible screen. Prepared, Emlyn recalled his plans. He lightened his footsteps and silently arrived outside Gallus Kevin's apartment without approaching the door. The notebook appeared out of thin air once again, before being flipped to the door-opening page. An illusory sound immediately resounded in Emlyn's mind as it prompted him to reach out a hand towards the wall. At the same time, Emlyn cautiously pulled back Lamino's travels into his clothes, using his invisible coat to hide it. When Emlyn's palm finally pressed the wall, he saw a ghostly blue, incorporeal, blurry door appear before his eyes. It was embedded in the wall, but it also showed signs of masonry at the bottom. Cocking his ear to hear the goings-on inside the house, he took a sniff of the air before taking a step forward. He then passed through the ghostly blue door, as if he was passing a screen of water. The scene before him changed immediately. It was filled with walls covered in stains and 3 wooden beds on the side, a worn-out cupboard, and all kinds of miscellaneous items. This was the inside of Gallus Kevin's apartment. As for the ghostly blue door behind Emlyn, it had long vanished as if it had never existed before. Cautiously surveying the area, Emlyn caught sight of his target, Gallus Kevin. This primordial moon believer was a good-looking mixed blood. He had long hair that reached his shoulders, and his eyes were a little red, as though he didn't fully acquire the eyes of a sanguine. At that moment, he was sitting by the side of the bed, staring at the door, his thoughts a mystery. Emlyn circled to his side without causing a commotion. He took out Lamino's travels, which he ensured was in a blind spot, and he flipped to a page that left his fingers slightly numb. It was a yellowish-brown goatskin page. The surface was filled with all kinds of ancient and distorted symbols and patterns. Together, they constructed a figure that looked like a thin tree with outstretched branches. After adjusting his angle, Emlyn slid his finger across the page. Suddenly, silver lightning illuminated the room as if it was daytime. A sizzling sound was heard as the lightning smote Gallus Kevin on the head, charring the primordial moon believer instantly. His body convulsed as his eyes lost focus. The silver bolts of lightning continued snaking around, while Emlyn's figure surfaced behind the frozen target's back. He reached out his right palm and clenched his opponent's neck. Gotcha! He calmly snapped Gallus Kevin's neck and yanked off his head and tossed the body away, eliminating the possibility of letting his opponent heal himself with his strong restorative powers. Gallus Kevin's headless corpse collapsed to the ground as blood sprayed everywhere. An artificial vampire lost its life just like that. Emlyn's calm expression was quickly replaced with surprise. He looked at the head in his hand with disbelief. He realized that Gallus Kevin didn't realize what was happening even upon death. Fixed in his eyes were pain and puzzlement. It's that easy. It happened like a breeze. Although Emlyn was proud, he didn't believe that he could finish off an artificial vampire that easily. However, reality told him that it was as easy as a breeze. A lightning strike that can cause paralysis, together with my high movement speed, had allowed me to instantly kill my target. The premise is that he's weak to lightning, allowing him to be easily paralyzed. Also, I had interfered with his spiritual intuition ahead of time, and avoided attacking him head-on by passing through the wall. Those were key to my success. After a few seconds of surprise, Emlyn recalled the details and concluded plenty of useful experience. This made him truly realize the potency of matching Beyonder powers, as well as the value of Laymanos travels. It's no wonder Mr. Hanged Man was the first one to have thoughts of renting it. Emlyn reined in his thoughts and looked at the blood that gushed out of Gallus Kevin. His throat couldn't help but move. He hadn't had that much fresh blood in a while. However, he didn't dare drink it. This was because the deceased Beyonder characteristic had yet to appear. The blood would still contain parts of it, and drinking it would easily result in excessive Beyonder characteristics, adding the risk of losing control. This wasn't conducive to his subsequent operations. Emlyn retracted his gaze and surveyed the surroundings. He found a stack of old newspapers and a tiny wooden chest. He planned on using that to store Gallus Kevin's head in. And before that, he sat down and waited for the Beyonder characteristic to appear. 2 minutes later, Emlyn suddenly looked up at the door. He heard footsteps. Immediately after that, he caught the scent of Argos. Why is this artificial vampire back? He returned midway. Emlyn White instantly became a little nervous, unsure how he was going to handle the issue. Thump. Argos knocked on the door from the outside without making a sound. This resulted in an abnormal silence. Emlyn was stunned. He immediately understood that Argos had caught scent of the blood and knew that something had happened inside. What should I do? Rush out and finish him? No, others will see me if I do so. I would then be caught by the official Beyonders. Emlyn instinctively took out a potion, had planned on hiding himself again. Suddenly he had an idea. Exhaling silently, Emlyn placed Gallus Kevin on the bed as he drank an invisibility potion and spewed out the corresponding amount of liquid. Slowly and very gently, he moved to a corner of the room and hid there. This way, it made it seem like the assassination was completed and that the murderer had long fled the scene. As time passed, aside from the occasional passing by of the residents, there was silence both inside and outside. Suddenly, Gallus Kevin's window creaked open as a pair of eyes shot its gaze inside. After careful inspection, Argos, with a festering face, leaped into the room and slowly walked to the corpse, which was still indistinctly expelling the Beyonder characteristic. In the corner, Emlyn White secretly took out Laymanos Travels, while Argos wasn't looking in his direction. He flipped to another page of Lightning Strike. At this moment, Argos's sight landed on the bed and on his companion's head, as well as the stack of old newspapers and the tiny wooden chest. His pupils suddenly constricted. Chapter 796. Slowly becoming proficient not good. Emlyn White traced Argos's gaze and realized that he had forgotten to deal with the old newspapers and the tiny wooden chest. Although they were part of the room, they were placed in different parts of the room. Now they were put together, making it appear rather odd. It was as though someone had wanted to do something with them before having to give up for the time being. Then why would there be a need to give up? Was the person alarmed by the knocking of the door? That means that the murderer hadn't left and is hiding in a particular corner of the room? Similar thoughts flashed in Argos's and Emlyn's mind at the same time. However, one of them was feeling perplexed, while the other was reverse inferring the other party's thoughts. No good. The two vampires reacted at the same time as Argos lunged to the side, as he emitted thick black gases that resembled a bat's wing. As for Emlyn White, his finger quickly swiped across the open Laymanos Travels. Suddenly, a silver hue appeared, illuminating the room again. The lightning that branched out didn't hit Argos and ended up hitting the ground beside the bed. It broke up into countless thin bolts that snaked towards conductive materials. Here, the wing which Argos used thick black gases to create seemed to attract the lightning. It was pursued by the snaking lightning as they struck him, spreading across his body. Argos became numb for a second, and crashed down to the ground before he could leap up. Emlyn hurriedly flipped through Lamino's travels, and once again slid his finger across a lightning strike page. Although he didn't know why there were so many pages of lightning strike, with them taking up nearly half of the yellowish-brown goatskin, he was overjoyed that he could keep using them. The silver bolts of lightning crashed down, smiting Argos, causing his body to emit black smoke despite having just recovered from his numbed state. Failing to leap away, his body began to convulse uncontrollably. Seizing this opportunity, Emlyn White bent his knee and leaped forward with his feet, approaching Argos with afterimages trailing behind him. Then he wrapped his right arm around Target's head, easily flashing behind him. Gotcha! Argos directly saw his back. His eyes filled with blood as the few festering parts on his face burst open, as deep and illusory darkness poured out from inside. Emlyn had no idea what had happened. He slid backward instinctively, as he kept changing his positioning. Argos didn't pursue him, as his eyes lost their rationality. All that was left was pure malicious intent, madness, and clear blankness. He raised his hands and pressed them against his head before forcefully twisting it, allowing it to return to its normal orientation with a crisp crack. And around this artificial vampire, the darkness surged as though it wanted to devour everything. Then, Argos stretched his neck from side to side as his body swelled and oozed out disgusting pus. He had come to Gallus Kevin tonight because his body had shown signs of losing control. There was a need to discuss a solution. He returned midway because he suddenly came to a realization that perhaps the harsh environment had caused intense negative effects to him due to his extraordinary sense of smell and sensitivity, thus resulting in him having signs of losing control. And at that moment, he completely broke down with the shadow of death hanging over him. He had lost control. Emlyn White's heart palpitated when Argos swept his gaze across him. He felt that he had encountered trouble again, as he couldn't help but curse the Primordial Moon's believers for often making themselves into monsters. He didn't immediately pray to Mr. Fool for two reasons. First, there wasn't any time as his opponent was about to launch an attack. Second, in a one-on-one situation, Emlyn believed that it wasn't too dangerous dealing with a Sequence 7 rampager. He made every second count by flipping through Lamino's travels quickly, letting it land on the page with lightning strike again. Pa! Thick, distorted bolts of silver lightning smote down heavily as it flailed its claws, striking the mutated Argos. At that moment, the lightning seemed to shatter the surging darkness, but it also seemed to be devoured by it. The two vanished at the same time, leaving behind Argos, who had finally locked his sights onto Emlyn. This artificial vampire who had lost control produced afterimages as he pounced towards his target. Emlyn crouched down and rolled, dodging the lethal strike. At the same time, he reached his free right hand into his pocket and took out a metal bottle. Bam! As Argos quickly turned around, he instantly appeared near his enemy. Pa! Without any time to remove the cover, Emlyn clenched his fingers, pinching open a crack in the metal bottle. Then, he threw the bottle ahead, letting the pure and radiant liquid inside splatter towards the approaching Argos. This was sun water, which he had concocted with his spirituality. It was extremely strong against vampires. This was the preparation that a potions professor had to do in advance. Being splashed by the liquid, Argos let out a blood-curdling scream. Wisps of black smoke billowed from his body as he lost his strength in midair. Bang! Although he collided with Emlyn, he failed to make him lose his balance. Emlyn tumbled twice, but didn't suffer any actual damage. While tumbling, Emlyn ignored managing his injuries. He swatted his right hand, which had made contact with a few drops of sun water, and quickly flipped Lamino's travels. Pa! Another bolt of silver lightning smote down, causing Argos's tragic cries to come to an end. This vampire who had lost control had appeared to be suffering the radiance of the sun from a close distance, as he fell into a state of intense paralysis. Emlyn seized this opportunity and took out another bottle of sun water. He unscrewed the cap and poured it towards his opponent. This time, Argos didn't even manage to let out a cry. His body began to melt like wax. It was only then that Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief. He then conjured a thick black fog behind him, turning it into illusory bats the size of a palm, as they swarmed towards his target. The black bats landed on Argos, enveloping him completely. Following that, they separated and flew back to Emlyn before vanishing. Argos's body had shrunk quite noticeably, and he finally couldn't hold out any longer. In his half-melted state, he slowly collapsed. Only then did Emlyn raise his right hand to check on the remnant pain. He saw that his palm and a few fingers had wounds that were corroding. However, the flesh inside was rapidly squirming as they healed themselves. "It's over. I actually finished him." Emlyn retracted his gaze and looked at Argos's corpse in slight disbelief. Although this hunt had quite a few ups and downs, he hadn't encountered any real danger the entire time. This made him realize that the existence of the Tarot Club made him far stronger than he imagined. If Argos had checked Gallus Kevin's corpse first and not noticed the newspapers and wooden chest, he definitely would have figured out that I possess beyonder powers like lightning strike. He wouldn't have used wings of darkness while dodging and end up being hit by the lightning. But this way, he wouldn't have discovered any abnormalities and wouldn't have made any evasive maneuvers ahead of time. My lightning strike would have struck him directly, and things would have been easier. Viewing it from this angle, no matter what happened, I would be able to kill him as long as I didn't make a mistake in my handling of matters. They're really weak, so I'm already this powerful. It's no wonder the ancestor made me join the Tarot Club. This is a gathering that prepares the various races for the impending apocalypse. It's of a much higher level than the other secret organizations. Emlyn tipped his chin up a little, as he couldn't help but curl his lips. Following that, he heard footsteps outside, but no one dared to approach. Argos's scream must have alarmed the surrounding residents, but they wouldn't dare enter because they're afraid of trouble. However, someone will definitely report it to the police. I need to clear the scene as quickly as possible and leave. Emlyn retracted his gaze from the door and walked to Gallus Kevin's corpse. From the pooling blood, he picked up an item the size of a fist. It was completely red in color and resembled a heart. It was expanding and contracting slightly, and its surface was translucent. He could vaguely see a liquid flowing inside, and it was none other than the beyonder characteristic of a Sequence 7 vampire of the apothecary pathway. "This is my trophy." Emlyn momentarily felt unaccustomed to it. After calming himself, he wrapped the beyonder characteristic in Gallus Kevin's head with the old newspapers and stuffed it into the wooden chest. After placing the wooden chest to the side, he yanked Argos's head, whose form looked nothing like before. He then took out another bottle of medicine and scattered in every corner of the room. During this process, Emlyn wasn't flustered at all. It was as though he wasn't worried that the official beyonders in East Borough would rush over. A few minutes later, he picked up Argos's mutated beyonder characteristic, glancing at its surface, which was nearly black in color, and the indistinct human face patterns. Behind him, a black gas was emanated. The black gas transformed into countless tiny bats again as they flew within the room. They combined with the potion liquid that had been sprayed earlier, forming a silent black flame that spread outwards. The black flames burned away the blood and corpse, as well as the traces of the lightning strikes. All that was left was a layer of sticky liquid that resembled asphalt covering the different objects in the room. Then, these liquid bodies turned into heavy black bats as they spiraled around Emlyn's body. Emlyn didn't have extravagant hopes that his actions could completely interfere in subsequent investigations. He only had one goal: to make the situation look okay. This made the police or official beyonders, who took on the case right off the matter, as something of little value. After a simple investigation, they would file it away and not pay any further attention to it. After doing all of this, Emlyn, with his cap and blackened face, surveyed the room. Following that, he bowed slightly at the crimson moon. Meanwhile, he flipped the pages of Lamino's travels and had it stop at teleportation. Emlyn's figure, along with the heavy bats, immediately turned transparent and formless as he vanished from the spot. After nearly 15 minutes, a few policemen from East Borough rushed in. They crashed through the door, but didn't discover any residents or corpses. They yawned languidly and forced the onlooking residents to admit that they had been hallucinating, thus ending the investigation. This was the efficiency and style of the East Borough Police. After leaving East Borough, Emlyn first headed home and hid Lamino's travels. Then, with his spoils, he headed straight for Odora's house in West Borough. He wanted to declare his victory and claim his reward. Chapter 797. Reward. Inside Odora's villa, Emlyn saw Cosme, who was also a baron like he was. This sanguine who seemed like a man in his prime was Nibs, Odora's spokesperson. "I'm also a baron, and one that recently achieved adulthood at that," Emlyn mumbled inwardly. He got up from the sofa in the activity room and bowed. "Good evening, my lord." Cosme was just about to say something when his nose twitched. He then cast his gaze towards the wooden chest beside Emlyn's feet. "The smell of fresh blood?" As he asked in puzzlement, he seemed to connect the dots and added after a second of thought, "You killed another target?" Emlyn curled his lips and shook his head. "No." Then, before Cosme could ask further, his smile turned profound. "Not one but two." "Two." The middle-aged gentleman was taken aback as he watched Emlyn bend down to open the lid. During this process, Emlyn's facial muscles winced a little as this series of actions had touched the wound on his right hand. Holding back the change in his expression, Emlyn allowed his arm to hang down slightly, allowing the chest to tilt and reveal its contents to the sanguine baron opposite him. Two charred, bloody heads were stuffed inside a pile of old newspapers. By the side were two transparent objects which resembled hearts, one red with vitality, and the other nearly black. This impactful scene was reflected in Cosme's eyes as he looked up in surprise, staring at Emlyn blankly as he blurted, "You did this?" Although he had only managed to recognize one head being Gallus Kevin's, but the two vampire Beyonder characteristics couldn't be faked. Emlyn put down the wooden chest and allowed his right hand to hang down naturally. Surreptitiously, he flicked his right hand very slightly along the corners of his trousers as he replied with a smile, "Of course. This is the thing. After receiving the £7,000 reward back then, I bought a particular baron's legacy at a particular Beyonder gathering. With it I advanced. I don't wish to use money to satisfy the murderers who hunt us sanguine, but I didn't wish for this legacy to land in the hands of others. Besides, the seller wasn't necessarily the hunter." Taking this opportunity, Emlyn revealed the fact that he had already become a baron. Furthermore, every word he said was the truth. This was a technique he had learned from the Tarot Club. "I long knew that you were a baron. Do you think your frequent purchases of all kinds of items with spirituality and the borrowing of books that explain potions would go unnoticed? If it weren't because of certain factors, we would have questioned you long ago. What I'm surprised about is your combat ability. You don't even have a single mystical item, and with you only wishing to buy dolls, it's not easy to hunt two artificial vampires without causing a commotion, even for a baron. Even I would need to make plenty of preparations and acquire detailed intelligence before it's possible. Without anyone noticing it, Emlyn is already this strong?" Cosme Odora couldn't help but lampoon as he revealed a fake smile. "So that's the reason. Emlyn, why did you hide it from us? Don't you wish to be addressed as Lord by the other sanguine?" Emlyn glanced at the sanguine's expression and tilted his chin. "I was planning on telling everyone, but since there was the hunting competition, I decided to give everyone a surprise. Cosme, I've already hunted 3 of the primordial moon believers, and you gave 5 targets. Does this mean that I've won?" He couldn't wait to change his form of address from Lord to Cosme. Cosme's eyelids twitched as he chuckled. "Yes, that's right. You can ignore the 2 other targets. Leave it to Russ Bathory and the rest. This way, they might still be eligible for a consolation prize." Having said that, Cosme found his attitude a little too cold, so he hurriedly asked in concern, "Were you injured?" "A little." Emlyn raised his right arm and stretched his fingers. To be frank, on his hunt that night, the worst injury he suffered was after he teleported out of East Borough. He had ripped apart his skin to wipe his blood across the cover of Lamino's travels. Cosme didn't develop the topic as he said after a few seconds of silence. Congratulations on being the victor of this hunting competition. You will receive 2 prizes. First, if there's a chance to become a viscount in the future, you will enter the final list of candidates, receiving free help for the ritual. Second, you will obtain a mystical item. It's a ring personally created by the ancestor. Although it doesn't contain any godhood, it possesses potent and very mystical powers. As the ancestor didn't name it, we all call it Lilith's ring. Also, according to convention, these 2 Beyonder characteristics will belong to the entire sanguine race. This way, we might be able to have 2 more newborns, and you would receive 3,000 pounds in cash in return. A ring personally created made by the ancestor. Although Emlyn was somewhat disappointed that the reward wasn't a Viscount's Beyonder characteristic, with it only being candidature and a free ritual, the ring made by sanguine ancestor Lilith herself was enough to put things right. To a proud sanguine with a sense of racial superiority, this was the highest form of honor. As his joy was quelled, Emlyn, who had participated in several tarot gatherings and had completed 2 hunts, felt that things weren't that simple. I was sent by the ancestor to Mr. Fool, and now I'm receiving a ring from the ancestor? Isn't that too much of a coincidence? Emlyn thought for a moment and couldn't figure out the answer. He finally decided to pray to Mr. Fool later, describe the entire situation, and see what advice he could give him. Noticing that Emlyn's joy had subsided, and that he had remained silent for more than 10 seconds, Cosme cleared his throat. That ring and the cash will be given to you tomorrow. When the time comes, I'll summon Russ Bathory and Company, officially announcing your victory in this hunting competition. Then, the ring will be given to you. No problem. Although Emlyn lacked the experience in such matters, he knew that rewards couldn't be given in private. It needed to be given in front of all the participants. Without staying any longer, he bade farewell and left Odora's villa in a rental carriage. As the carriage slowly drove off, Emlyn took a look at the crimson moon, which was hanging silently in the sky. His mind gradually calmed as he couldn't help but recall everything that happened that very day. From that, he concluded lessons and gained experience. Finally, he began counting how many Beyonder powers he needed to record onto Lamino's travels. I used all of the 5 lightning strikes. 1 teleportation, 1 door opening, 1 astromancy. A total of 8 times. In addition to that, I need to pay 2 additional powers, making it 10. This will be a little difficult. There are some Beyonder powers that probably can't be recorded. For example, my self-recovery powers. I can only repeat them. After I obtain the ancestor's ring, I can try recording the Beyonder powers it possesses. Lilith's ring? Above the gray fog in the palace that looked like a giant's residence, Klein sat in the high-back chair belonging to the Fool, as he quietly pondered over Emlyn White's prayer. He had originally imagined that he would be woken up in the middle of the night, having to provide a particular inexperienced vampire help. But to his surprise, Emlyn had finished everything by 11, and had even submitted the mission in. Back then, Emlyn prayed to the Fool because of a revelation from the ancient god Lilith. Now he has received her ring. Regardless of who Lilith is, I need to be wary and observe. Klein seriously contemplated for a few seconds before replying to Emlyn's prayer in a staid manner. When praying to me or participating in the gathering in the future, take off that ring. After giving his instructions, Klein returned to the real world. Without worrying about being woken up in the middle of the night, he slept till daybreak. After breakfast and taking a rest, it was time for his etiquette lessons with Wiana. It was a special lesson for the ball he was hosting at his residence on the weekend. Wahana's soft black hair flowed as the ends of her dress twirled, while she led Dwayne Dantes into familiarizing himself with the opening dance. In the brisk and comforting music, this etiquette teacher suddenly said, "I heard Ma'am Mary visited you yesterday afternoon?" "Yes." As Klein poignantly reflected on how there weren't any secrets in the world of social networks, he nodded frankly. Wiana nodded gently and said after 2 seconds of silence, "I heard that Ma'am Mary has pledged all her shares to the bank to borrow a large sum of money. This is a warning for me to be careful, so that I wouldn't fall into a scam. The help I previously provided had not only allowed me to quickly enter the social circles in Buckland Street, but it has also continuously brought me benefits. However, Ma'am Mary's pledging of shares was to secretly acquire more shares. Klein listened in silence before revealing a warm smile. Thank you. He paused and added, I believe in the character of every friend, but in the field of business, caution is forever the first principle. I've already gotten Walter to hire an independent lawyer and accounting team to perform the due diligence and come up with a proposal that can protect my interests and avoid taxes in the best way possible. Before that, I won't make any decisions. Wiana raised her head a little and looked into Dwayne Dantes' deep blue eyes before suddenly sighing with a laugh. You truly are a wise person. Klein originally wanted to attribute it to maturity, but thinking back to how Wahana's husband had previously been in a scam over his cloth, and he had only managed to reduce his losses thanks to him, such an answer easily made her imagine things and make comparisons. Since it would appear like a mockery, he changed his excuse and said with a chuckle, My wisdom comes from the lessons I've received in the past. It's hard to imagine you being duped. Wiana chuckled as she lowered her head. Is it due to all your experiences that you can appreciate the different kinds of charms for all kinds of ladies? When is this rumor ever going to end? Klein said with a helpless smile. Every flower has something beautiful about it. After familiarizing himself with the entire process and the corresponding dance, Klein walked Wiana out. Together with his valet Richardson, he took up Ma'am Mary's invitation and headed for the coin company in Sherwood Borough. Chapter 798. Revisiting an old haunt. Sherwood Borough, outside the coin company. When Klein alighted from the carriage, he looked around as if he had never been here before, as though everything had a strong sense of novelty. In fact, he wasn't a stranger to the area. He knew that opposite the street was the Gardley department store, where the middle class enjoyed patronizing, and that there was a shop not far away that was famous for its specialty desi pies. He had once spent a considerable amount of time here waiting for Daraga Gale to tail him so as to obtain evidence to his acts of adultery. Retracting his gaze, Klein walked towards the coin company with Richardson. Ma'am Mary and her lady's maid were already waiting there. In the relatively conservative Lone Kingdom, a lady's servant had to be of the same sex. Otherwise, it would result in nasty gossip, affecting her social relationships and marriage. Therefore, even though Ma'am Mary's lady's maid needed to play the role of her secretary to a certain extent, with her understanding societal etiquette, commercial knowledge, and having a certain level of negotiation skill, all she could do was select from women with good education or with relevant working experience, without considering any men. Similarly, gentlemen needed to have valets and commercial secretaries of the same sex. Of course, even so, there were always people who couldn't rein themselves in and engaged in immoral acts. Every year, there were cases of servants and their employers having relations. Amongst them, the maids were mostly the victims. They were either cheated, forced, or enticed to become the male employer's lover. When they were eventually discovered, they would be fired, losing their jobs. Then, their reputation would be destroyed, making them ineligible options for servants again. Many a time, they had to become prostitutes. Good afternoon, Dwayne. Ma'am Mary welcomed him with a smile. Klein bowed and said, Good afternoon, ma'am. It really is a flourishing area. Such a topic was roughly equivalent to talking about the weather. After Mary exchanged pleasantries with him, she led Dwayne Dantes through the coin company's entrance and said with a smile, Later, there will be professionals giving you an explanation as they show you around. After about half an hour, head on up. I've prepared a buffet and invited a few friends in different circles. Friends in different circles? This is her trying to expand my social circle. Very sincere. Klein nodded slightly and said, As someone not from the area, I always look forward to knowing more friends, having just come to Backland. No, you're nothing like that. If I had the liberty of saying it, you're a true Backland gentleman who has received excellent education, Ma'am Mary replied politely. As they conversed, they passed through the door and entered the reception area, which had excellent lighting. A stocky man in a suit with a beautiful mustache stood there waiting. "This is Luke Sammer. He is our coin company's first manager." Mary introduced him to Dwayne Dantes. "Actually, I know him." Klein looked at Luke and nodded with a smile. To him, Luke Sammer was a rather staid, professional gentleman. He enjoyed machinery and was a very gentlemanly person at banquets. He didn't belittle the poor detective who had yet to make a name for himself. Nor did he deliberately curry favor with the few mid-ranking civil servants of the Backland Municipal Department that lived on Minsk Street. "This is my friend Dwayne Dantes. He's interested in anthracite and high-quality charcoal. Help me give him a detailed explanation," Mary said to Luke. Luke, who had been informed ahead of time, took a step forward and looked at the tycoon from Desi Bay. He gave a warm smile and said respectfully, "Mr. Dantes, this is the coin company's headquarters. We have long-term agreements with several anthracite mines. We supply Cherwood, Hillston, North and West Borough with anthracite and high-quality charcoal, satisfying 30% of their overall demand. We also have the chance of clinching a huge contract with the Navy." I've never seen Luke with such an expression. Klein followed him around Coin Company with an unperturbed expression as he listened to Luke introduce the various areas. From time to time, he would inquire without expressing his attitude. Half an hour later, they went up to the second floor and entered a huge meeting room. The place was already set up with tables clinging close to the walls. Plates of food were randomly placed on them, with mainly ham, smoked meat, sausages, bread, salad, cakes, pudding and other cold dishes. However, there were a few hot dishes. Just as he stepped in, Dwayne Dantes was introduced to two men who were talking close to Mary. "This is reporter Mike Joseph from the Daily Observer. This is an excellent surgeon, Dr. Aaron Series. In Backland, you will often need them." As Klein listened to Mary, he smiled at the two gentlemen, the corners of his lips nearly twitching. "These are all friends I'm very familiar with. Well, I'm even more familiar with the fetus in the womb of Aaron's wife." Why does that sound wrong?" As Klein lampooned, he patiently waited for Mary to introduce Dwayne Dantes to the two men before politely greeting Mike and Aaron. Mike Joseph didn't look much different from last year. He had thin brows, rough skin and charming blue eyes. As for Aaron Series, although he was intrinsically a cold and reserved person, he didn't make it obvious. Everything that happened in the recent half-year had been smooth for him. In terms of mood and confidence, he was riding a high. Upon hearing that Dantes was a tycoon from Desi, Mike took out his name card and handed it over with a smile. "You don't mind me advertising, right? If you wish to publish an advertisement, find me. Be it the Daily Observer or the Tussock Times, I can provide you with a discounted price." As he spoke, Mike winked, indicating that he was joking. "You are nothing but a reporter with all these fake identification documents. Why didn't you mention the discount price advertisements to Sherlock Moriarty in the past? You were looking down on the detective, were you?" Klein lampooned and exchanged name cards with him. "I've always had such needs." Following that, he turned to Aaron and handed another name card to him. "I was recently ill and recovered only recently. I'm very aware of how important a doctor is. I'm a surgeon, so I believe you wouldn't wish to meet me that much." Despite saying so, Aaron still received the name card. "No, I'd love to meet you. I even wish to join the party of your child's birth," Klein mumbled, deliberately leading the conversation to the field of medicine and having a good conversation with Mike and Aaron. He had previously been stressing over how to close ties with Aaron to re-establish connections with a particular unborn fetus. After all, the paper crane was about to tear at any moment, making it unusable for even one more attempt. As for Sherlock Moriarty, it was difficult for him to openly appear in Backland to pay Aaron a visit, much less participate in the birth party. There aren't any problems now. With Ma'am Mary's introduction, I can very naturally get close to Aaron. When the time comes, I'll definitely be invited. Hee. I might even be made the godfather of a particular snake of Mercury. After all, we are all believers of the goddess. Will this make a particular fetus angry? I'd better be careful. I definitely wouldn't mention this unless Aaron mentions it. Klein thought in delight. He skillfully held himself back, without appearing overly passionate on their first meeting. After a simple chat, he was introduced to the other guests by Mary. During this process, Klein didn't forget to get some food and water, making him appear to easily adapt himself to the environment. After completing a round, Mary stopped and said after some deliberation, "Everyone here is my friend. This means that you didn't invite anyone from the other camp. And you are also including me as your friend?" Klein nodded gently. "I probably shouldn't ask as a gentleman, but as a businessman, I need to know who is the person, or who are the people, vying for the coin company's controlling share rights." Mary fell silent for 2 seconds. Baron Sindras and his friends. They wished to publicly list the coin company and earn the sky-high evaluation that will eventually happen. They're completely unconcerned with the company's future development. Baron Sindras, one of the richest men in Lone. By donating to the Conservative Party, he became an aristocrat and is a banker, factory owner, and a powerful businessman. It's hard to tell where he stands, so even though he relied on the Conservative Party to obtain his aristocratic title, he's more aligned with the new party while being biased towards merchants. Klein thought and asked with a smile, "Why didn't you get that Mr. Hall to help? His father is a powerful noble and banker. He should be able to provide you with the necessary help." Mary said with a wry smile, "Mr. Hall doesn't wish to involve himself in this matter. He claims to be the chief secretary of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, so he can't be involved in commercial activities that deal with anthracite or charcoal. A man whose true ambitions lie in politics. However, he probably doesn't wish to be at odds with Baron Sindras. Haha. If I were to choose another butler back then, I'd likely have established ties with Baron Sindras. He's so rich, so if he really wants to raise the price, I wouldn't be able to beat him. Will a trope of him using money to crush me appear?" Klein didn't ask further as he said, "I will wait for the investigation report." Realizing that Dwayne Dantes wasn't directly backing out, Mary said with slight gratitude, "In this age, chivalrous people are already few and far between. You are one of them." Klein smiled without promising anything. After the buffet was over, he began returning to Northborough on his high-end four-wheeled carriage. As he daydreamed while looking out the window, Klein suddenly said to Richardson, "Turn towards St. Samuel Cathedral." He had failed to figure out the exact answer to the reason for the anomaly in the cathedral, which was later quelled. This made him wonder if he should find a chance to make contact with the keepers. He also remembered that every afternoon, there would at least be a keeper who prayed to the goddess in the prayer hall. How should I make contact? In that environment, even a conversation will appear noisy, and this will easily incur the suspicion of others. Klein frowned slightly as he decided to observe before coming up with a solution. The carriage didn't change direction as it continued driving towards Buckland Street, but it didn't stop and instead continued past it. Inside the carriage, Klein closed his eyes to calm his slightly anxious feelings. Chapter 799, Spying Northborough, St. Samuel Cathedral. Just as Klein entered the main prayer hall, he used the points of light that shone from the back of the altar to survey his surroundings, taking in all the believers inside. In one glance, Klein rapidly locked onto a target. He followed the aisle and walked forward without showing any abnormal signs. In the first row was an elder wearing a black clergyman's robe, but he exuded a cold aura. His face was pale, and his hair was withered and yellow. He had his eyes closed tightly as he prayed with great focus. He was one of the keepers that Klein had previously sensed. His shift is usually on Friday. Klein didn't approach him, and instead sat 2 pews away from him. After finding a spot to sit down, he handed over his hat and cane to Richardson. Then, while sitting down, he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice, silently activating his spirit-body threads vision. Suddenly, black illusory threads appeared in front of Klein, as they densely extended out of different spirit bodies endlessly. Having just taken his seat, Klein shifted his gaze, casting it onto the keeper. He nearly exclaimed from what he saw, but thanks to his self-control as a clown, and his ability to expect abnormal situations, he managed to relax and maintain his staid attitude. In his vision, although the yellow-haired elder had spirit body threads extending out, his body was entirely black in color on the inside, as the darkness swallowed the origins of the illusory threads in a way that was completely different from ordinary beyonders. Indeed, they have already been eroded by the core seal, causing a mutation at the level of the soul. From the looks of it, the problem is closer to my second guess. They are in a sense part of the core seal. Once they show signs of losing control, they will immediately trigger the item's instinctive reaction that forcefully quells them. It's no wonder the keepers need to be a voluntary role and be advanced in their years. They probably understand the outcome. Klein sighed as he prepared to deactivate his spirit body thread senses and retract his gaze. At this moment he saw a pair of eyes. They were black without any emotions within. Beside the eyes, there were pronounced wrinkles that extended bit by bit, as though they were distorted, strange, mysterious symbols. They were the keeper's eyes. At some point in time, he had straightened his body, turned around, and looked blankly at Dwayne Dantes. Klein's scalp instantly went numb as he forced a smile and nodded at him, as though it was a normal meeting of eyes. The keeper slowly moved his head as a response. Then, Klein felt as though he was extracted from his surroundings, as things turned blurry before turning clear. At that instant, he knew that he had been pulled into a dream. Hence, as he maintained his image as Dwayne Dantes, he sized up his surroundings, only to realize that he was still inside St. Samuel Cathedral. However, all the pews were either damaged or overturned and strewn everywhere. It looked as though it had met with a raid. The altar up ahead was filled with cracks and weeds. The thick layer of dust made it seem like it had been in such desolate conditions since a long time ago. The keeper with yellow, withered hair was in front of the collapsed donation box, coldly staring at Dwayne Dantes, who was suited in black. Upon seeing Klein look over, he widened his mouth to reveal white, sharp, irregular teeth. And these teeth were embedded with blurry, indistinct, and tiny figures. They had complete facial features and limbs, and their expressions were different, but were colored with the same pain, as though they were imprisoned there and unable to escape. Grunt! The keeper's throat let out a growl that sounded like a beast as his back hunched over. By his spine and waist, his clothes swelled as 4 blood vessel-covered arms without any skin grew out. Right on the heels of that, they grew fine black hair, as the tips of his fingers grew sharp nails with a smacking sound. In just 3 short seconds, the keeper who looked normal had turned into an 8-legged monster that sprawled on the ground. It looked like a spider that had silently woven its web in the night while awaiting its prey, and also like a deformed black wolf that struck intense fear into one's heart. Meanwhile, 2 gigantic palms filled with black hair extended out of the desolate altar without any warning. They pressed onto the sides as black gas condensed into slippery tentacles that extended in every direction. Soon they filled the entire prayer hall. The aura that left him trembling, the extreme sense of fear, and the huge, illusory figure were penetrating an invisible barrier as they manifested more clearly. He lost control. That keeper lost control? Klein stood there, subconsciously wishing to react and use his uniqueness to forcibly escape the dream. But suddenly, he figured out the series of events that had happened. His expression changed as he wore a terrified expression as he ran to the door, trembling. It looked like he was struggling in a dream. In the time it took to take a breath, a dark chill spread out from the outside world like a tidal wave, inundating the entire dream and quelling everything. Klein snapped his eyes open and realized that he had fallen asleep at some point in time. As for the yellow-haired keeper, he had long turned his head to continue praying. Dwayne Dantes' eyes darted around as he looked around in horror, as though he was still immersed in the dream and unable to escape the horror that had gripped him. After nearly a minute, he took 2 deep breaths and looked at the sacred emblem again, drawing a sign of the crimson moon on his chest. Only then did Klein have the time to recall the experience he had, and began speculating as to what had happened. As I had spied on his spirit body threads, It caused him to show signs of losing control, thus causing an excessive reaction by pulling me into a dream and attempting to deal with me. Later, the core seal behind Cheney's gate sensed the anomaly and quelled the problem. Now the crux of the matter is if the keeper still remembers the source of his near mutation. If he's already used to it, he should find the cause of the problem very vague considering his present state. Of course, it might not be my problem. Perhaps he was already on the brink of losing control. Klein looked at the elder once again to observe what he would do next to determine how he should react. If all else fails, I'll directly use creeping hunger and escape with traveling. Klein rapidly made up his mind as he patiently waited for the possible repercussions. A few minutes later, he saw Bishop Electra walk in from the side door towards him. Klein's heart tightened as he spread open his left fingers in preparation to activate creeping hunger. At that moment, he suddenly had an idea and stopped his actions. If the keeper has already informed the bishops about my problematic situation via a dream, I would be the victim of a collective assault by the church's beyonders. After all, pulling me into a dream can avoid harming the other believers. Therefore, they have no need to find a bishop I'm familiar with to come over. It's likely more to extend their regards and to placate me. Klein retracted his gaze and continued a praying pose. In less than a minute, he finally sensed someone approach as he looked up and saw Bishop Electra softly say, "You don't look too well?" I fell asleep without realizing it and had a nightmare. I still feel a little afraid, Klein said with a self-deprecating smile. Bishop Electra sat beside him and said in a staid manner, "Dreams are sometimes the manifestation of the fear within you. You will feel better as long as you sincerely pray to the goddess and consume holy water. Of course, the most important thing is to not suppress yourself usually. Learn to confess to the goddess. At times, wailing in secret can reduce a lot of your stress." Klein secretly observed the bishop's attitude and read his tone before heaving a sigh of relief. "I understand." He cast his gaze forward again, bowed his head, and clasped his hands to begin praying silently. While doing so, he saw the keeper in front of him stand up and walk to the side door where a bishop was waiting. Phew! Klein silently exhaled as he truly became one with the serene environment. Suddenly, he heard a voice that was his, but it wasn't something that he could control. "Did you think what you did was well hidden?" "No, not at all. Have you forgotten that you've touched the Evernight Goddess's holy artifact?" You're tuning in to the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.